Hello, friends, and welcome back to a special bonus episode of the Jank Tank, the final episode of 2024. My name is Timothy Zaccanino. I'll be hosting for you today, and with me on the line we have Teld, fresh off of a Christmas vacation, winter vacation, I assume. You're out of school at this point, and we've also invited Danelius back to jam some peasant discussion for 2024. How are we doing, gentlemen?
I am doing wonderful. I woke up yesterday, realized I didn't have to go back to work for a little bit, wouldn't have to deal with anything, and just it was lovely.
Danelius, doing all right? Answer that question as if we haven't been talking for the past 20 minutes.
No, exact same. I don't think anybody on my team is working for the next 2 weeks, so it'll be a very chill end of year.
Awesome. Well, it's good to have you back, Danelius. I think we had a really fun time talking about Peasant Cube. What did we talk about? Foundations? Was that when we got an actual episode out there to the people? And I think we're going to have you on as a mainstay of at least new sets, if not more, beyond that. But we're talking 2024 in review for Peasant Cube specifically, so we had to have you come in and join us. We did our mainline cube episode not too long ago. By the time you're listening to this, that episode should already be up as the last mainline episode of the Jank Tank for 2024, where we went through all of the different sets of the year, all the different mechanics, and some highlights from each set, but at a high power level for our mainline cube and Magic as a whole. We're going to do something a little bit different with this one, and I got to give Danelius a little bit of credit here. So I had a little mini superlative idea at the end of these 2024 review episodes, but Danelius posed the question of why don't we just make the entire episode a superlative awards show for 2024, and I dig it completely. I'm a big fan of superlatives. I know some people think it's like super dorky or geeky or whatever, but I'm a huge fan of just slapping awards on things and doing best of and worst of lists. So we are going to approach Peasant Cube for the year in the form of a bunch of different awards and name our favorites and least favorites from a bunch of different categories. So should be a fun time. At some point, once we get halfway through this list, we might actually be bringing up a lot of the same cards over and over again. But, well, the best cards are the best cards for a reason, because they hit a lot of different categories. And you'll have to excuse me a little bit. I told the other two here that I was going to do this, but I didn't really ask for confirmation, do now, ask for forgiveness later. I just kind of slapped a really gimmicky name on every single one of these superlatives. So some of them are going to demand a little bit more explanation than others, but I hope I did a good job of expressing what the award is through the name, but we'll tell you what the awards are. I'm not going to leave the people guessing. Before we do anything, though, let's go ahead and get housekeeping out of the way. Remember, the best way to support Jank Diver Gaming and the Jank Tank podcast is to join our Discord server. Come draft with us, talk about Cube, talk about Retail Limited, talk about all things Magic, give us your feedback. You can find links to our Discord server, the Jank Diver Gaming Discord server, wherever you're listening to this podcast, and Danelius is in there. You can come chat him up as well. He seems to be the first person on any new peasant-related spoilers. He's got these tier lists before we even look at the spoilers. So
I'm always thinking about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I love the conversation, though. I really do. We host tons of scheduled drafts throughout the week, including the Peasant Cube, which is going to be the focus of today's episode, on Saturday nights, though there's a little bit of discussion this morning about possibly changing that. We have our mainline Jank Diver Cube on Sunday nights. We have F&M style drafts on Fridays, where our players vote for a cube to play. And we have various guest cubes created by members of our server throughout the week, so there's always plenty to do, occasionally a chaos draft here and there as well. You can check out our socials, Twitter, at Jank Diver Gaming. We're on Blue Sky, at Jank Diver Gaming as well, though I haven't really logged back into that yet. I'm may or may not keep up with that, depending on the momentum that the site gets. You can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/JankDiverGaming, and you can find Teld streaming at twitch.tv/Teld Talks, TELD Talks. Also, Danelius is a moderator for the Court of Calls Discord server, or I guess it's the limited level ups, right? Yep. I feel like I should know this. It's the third time that I mentioned it, and I have the notes written in front of me. The limited level ups Discord server, where they focus a lot on limited, as it were, as the name suggests. So that's Court of Calls Discord server, and you can go find Denelius there as well and support Alex there as well. Peasant Cube. So I asked a question in the mainline cube that I'm going to ask here as well, and then I'll ask the same question at the end as kind of a wrap up and a bow to put on this episode. But just gut feeling, we've already written out our notes, but we haven't talked about anything between the three of us. Gut feeling, how was 2024 for Peasant Cube?
I think it was maybe the biggest year of all time for Peasant, both because of a couple of the sets that came out, but also the change that happened with play boosters. I think that it kind of just marks a new era. Maybe not as impactful as Fire Design, but the fact that we're now getting so many uncommons in each of these sets, and I think they're really trying to put a lot of the juice at the uncommon level now. Just that all spells really well for Peasants. Yeah, I think it was a big year overall. I think we got a lot of interesting cards.
Yeah, I mentioned in the main episode this was a marquee year for retail draft in general. I think just Peasant. If you like Peasant, you'll probably like retail draft. And Outlaws and Duskmourn were both just S tier sets. I personally really enjoyed Murders. I think it's kind of a mid set, but I did enjoy it. Maybe it's just because I had a really high win rate in that set, and almost never drafted white aggro, which was pretty fun. And then Modern Horizons 3 is a contentious one, but I know there's some people who absolutely love it, and some people who are really traumatized by a certain red-green devoid creature.
Hey, that's going to come up at some point on one of these awards. Yeah, great year, I think, for Magic in general. I mean, the lineup of sets is awesome. I know Murders at Karlov Manor and Outlaws of Thunder Junction are contentious for their kind of gimmicks, but I'm all about the gimmicks. I'm looking forward to Ether Drift and dumb death race goblins and insects and whatever else is going on there. I just think it's cool to, if you're going to revisit some of your old properties, I think it's fine to put a little twist on them. And I don't really care about putting cowboy hats on things, because that's kind of what I would expect from a Magic version of a Wild West set. And then you have things like Bloomburrow and Duskmourn, which were huge hits, I think. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of everything that came out this year. And I'm glad you brought up play boosters, because it wasn't something that really clicked in my head that play boosters kicked off this year with Murders at Karlov Manor. They might have been in a remaster set before that, but play boosters, you alluded to the fact that there's just more uncommons now. But yeah, I think there's 101 uncommons per set. Yeah, play boosters just mean there are fewer throwaway commons, there are more uncommons in general, and a lot of the power is being concentrated into uncommons, which means Peasant Cube is flourishing. So yeah, maybe this is just the best year overall for 2024, and maybe 90% of that is due to Modern Horizons 3, but we'll parse some of that out. So yeah, and any other final thoughts on or I guess thoughts in general on 2024 Peasant Cube in general, differences from the prior year before we actually start throwing some awards around?
Yeah, I know when play boosters were announced, we were all worried that retail draft was about to just be, every deck has 10 rares, which is kind of what happened. Every deck does feel like it has a bunch of rares, but I guess I didn't anticipate how much they juiced the uncommons, especially where in most of these formats, the real drivers of the format were not the rares. The rares were the big bombs that would seal games, but your in and out games were just driven by these really powerful value uncommons.
I think that the most or an interesting thing going forward is just how much and whether or not the commons survive in Peasant. I think we are definitely headed for a world where, we're already to a degree there. I think 75% of my cube, something like that, is uncommons, but it's only a matter of time basically before we're at 90-95% of Peasant cubes being uncommons, and then that gives you a reason to make a Pauper cube, because you're going to want to maybe have a place to play with your commons, but they're just going to have a hard time stacking up, I think, in this play booster world to what we're getting at uncommon.
Yeah, commons this year increasingly started feeling more like they were like things that smoothed out the last 4 or 5 cards of your deck rather than the core of your deck. But I do think your point about making Pauper Cube and Peasant Cube very functionally different is pretty cool. I always felt like they were fairly similar. You got some better value engines at Peasant and some better build arounds, but I think Pauper is growing distinctly different as a nuts and bolts style gameplay.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
I did have a question, because you're going to go over a couple of the non-standard release cards that really stood out this year, peasant cards. The structure of your cube, I recall you saying something along the lines of you only play with cards that came out in like a standard release. So do you include cards from like the Assassin's Creed and Fallout Commander decks and stuff like that in your paper cube?
No, I mean my paper cube is a copy of it's just one cube. I just have it in paper also. But yes, I'm arena only for my list. I wanted to bring these up just because I talk with plenty of folks who maintain paper peasant cubes, and I think that like the average person who has a peasant cube these days, it's probably in paper. It's more likely to be paper at least than it is on arena. And so I just wanted to shout out some of these cards that were paper only this year. But no, personally, I don't get to play with these. I just have to look at them from afar and wish I could play with them, because I'll be honest, some of the peasant cards this year, specifically from Fallout and Assassin's Creed, there's also some downshifts, I think, at the beginning of the year in some master set. But mostly these cards from Assassin's Creed and Fallout, I think, are very interesting. I came up with a list of like 15 different cards that I thought were worth talking about. I'm not going to talk about 15 cards here. In fact, I'm only going to read a couple of these. First card I would recommend people go take a look at if you have a paper cube, just because it's fascinating and very different than I think any other card available in Peasant right now, is the Aesir Escape Valhalla. It's a green saga. It's very good. It's just a great green long game attrition engine. Green just doesn't have access to cards like this, so I'm not going to read it because it's very long and it's a saga, but I would recommend take a look at that.
It's the one that the third chapter rebuys itself, right?
Puts it back in your hand and the card that you exiled from your graveyard. So it's just a forever engine. You can just keep on playing it, gaining life, putting counters on things, and essentially drawing cards. Yeah, it's a very cool card.
This card is wild.
Yes, it's wild. All right, I probably should just read it at this point. Now that we're talking about
I get. Look, if you only got 3 cards listed here, I think you can read them off. And I've actually mentioned Tax Collector on the show before.
Okay, good.
As well.
All right, so this is Aesir Escape Valhalla. It's a green saga, 2 and a green. The first chapter is exile a permanent card from your graveyard. You gain life equal to its mana value. The thing to keep in your mind as you're imagining this is Generous Ent. That's what I would do, because I think that's where it kind of shows how busted it is. Oh, yeah. So exile Generous Ent from your graveyard. You gain life equal to its mana value, which is 6 in this case. Chapter 2, put a number of +1/+1 counters on target creature you control equal to the mana value of the exiled card. So it's put 6 +1/+1 counters.
I didn't know that's what the second chapter was. That's really good. Holy shit.
And then chapter 3, you just put this saga back into your hand along with the card you exiled. So if you think about that, it's essentially just a draw 2. So in total, this card for 3 mana says you gain a bunch of life, you get a bunch of +1/+1 counters, and then you draw 2 cards. Now it's slow. It is definitely slow. But if the whole rest of your deck is just black and green interaction, this is just a game-winning card all on its own. You don't need to do anything else other than just have a big permanent to exile with it. So
that's an uncommon.
I know your cube is faster than ours, and because we focus a little more, I think, on like synergies and different unique board states and stuff like that, where you're just like most efficient card in every slot. I think for our cube specifically, this card would be broken. I think this would be like crazy broken in our cube.
I didn't realize that I own this card. I didn't realize the second chapter was put a bunch of counters on stuff.
Tons of +1/+1 counters. Yep.
I've always been a champion of Pulsar, which is like the get back a land or creature gain 6 life, and this just does that while also putting 6 counters and always drawing you another Pulsar.
Oh my gosh, this card is like unbelievably good. Yeah, wow.
But it's good, but it's also, again, it's different. It's like it's kind of Pulsar or adjacent, but it is ultimately it's an engine card. It just keeps going forever and ever. So if you just make the game last for 40 turns. All right, so the second card I want to talk about is Tax Collector. I don't even know. It's unclear to me how good this card is, but I think it's just such a cool design, and I really hope they reprint it outside of Assassin's Creed, because the flavor, you can just print it anywhere in my mind. But so this is Tax Collector. It's 1 and a white for a Human Advisor creature, 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield, you choose to either tax or arrest. And if you tax, then until your next turn, spells your opponent's cast cost 1 more to cast. And then if you arrest, you get to detain target creature and opponent control. So if you think about this, just playing this on turn 2 is going to time walk your opponents a really legitimate percentage of the time. Like, they're just not going to be able to play anything on their second turn, which is crazy. And then if you draw this off the top late, where tax doesn't really matter much, then it's just a bear that also has, an ETB detain kind of buyout to it. And again, so I really like the card. I do think it's really strong, but the reason I love it so much is the flavor is just so on point, and I really hope it doesn't stay relegated to this kind of side product that didn't have any limited application. But the number 1 card of the year for paper, not close. And I asked some folks about this; they agreed. this card is unbelievable. So this is Origin of the Hidden Ones, another Assassin's Creed card. This is 3 in a red for a saga. Chapter 1, deal 4 damage to any target. Chapter 2, create 2 1/1 assassins with menace. And Chapter 3, whenever an assassin you control attacks this turn, create another 1/1 assassin token with menace that's tapped and attacking. So you get...
Notably, that's not non-token assassin.
It's not token assassin. It's also, you get... It's not limited to just 1. So if you attack with 2, if you attack with 3, if you attack with 5, you get that many. So on its own, this card is essentially 4 mana for 4 damage and 4 1/1s with menace, unless they're able to somehow disrupt what you're doing. That by itself is nuts. Now you imagine the fact that you can rebuy this, and you can do it again, and you can then double your menace tokens again, potentially, in a later turn. It's just completely outrageous. You didn't need much on top of a saga that deals 4 damage as its first, chapter to any target, because you can rebuy that, from your graveyard or return it with Essence Reliquary or whatever. So nuts, absolutely insane.
I did a video where I talked about a bunch of cards that I thought were like these cool little package cards, and one of them was Nesting Ground. And I was mentioning, I think sagas were the best thing to do. Man, this is your nesting ground target, right? You just you keep repeating, deal 4, keep repeating, make 2, and just float the trigger for a few turns.
Oh gosh, yeah, yep. There was many more cards we could have talked about. I think it was a very cool year for paper only Peasant. We don't get to play with any of these. It's very sad, but yeah, nope. a banner year for paper Peasant card.
Yeah, and from this point forward, we're not going to be bringing up cards that were only printed in paper, because we do all of our cubing. The Jank Gaming community is like exclusively arena only, so that's the stuff we have experience with. There are other cool shouts that could come out from I know Ravnica Clue Edition had a lot of really cool cards that I was bummed didn't actually come to arena in any way, shape, or form. There's things like Fallout and what else? Assassin's Creed. There was another
there's a reprint set that had some downshifts that were a little bit impactful from like January.
Yeah, Ravnica Remastered, I think, was the remaster for 2024. Yeah, a lot of really cool stuff that does affect Paper Peasant Cube, but we don't have on Arena, so we're going to keep the conversation to digital only right now. And unless you have any other paper shouts, I think we can go ahead and start throwing some awards around here.
Let's do it.
Okay, so I'm going to introduce these awards, and then myself, Danelius, and Teld all individually entered what we think should win the award, and we actually have like different answers for the vast majority of these. We are going to have to kind of moderate ourselves a little bit on not talking in depth about every single card that's going to come up. So maybe just a brief explanation of what the card is as a reminder, and why it wins the award. And then once we get to kind of the repeat categories, we can kind of sum up our thoughts pretty easily there. But the first award is going to be the STONKS Award. This award goes to the biggest mover up, the most improved card, or a totally redefined card from 2024. And I guess I'll kick off with my answer, which was Armored Scrap Gorger from All Will Be One. That's the 0/3 for 1 and a green that can tap, exile a card from a graveyard, and then produces any color of mana, gets an oil counter when you do that, and when it hits 3 oil counters, it becomes a 3/3. And this is kind of a placeholder for graveyard hate cards in general, like Cling to Dust and Scrabble and Claws, because not only did the graveyard decks get a lot better, but this also became a combo tool with Insidious Roots and Chalk Outline and Cadaver Lab, which this whole category of cards that care about cards leaving your own graveyard, that I think was a super potent strategy in our cube. So I'm going to go ahead and give the STONKS Award to Scrap Gorger here, and just kind of note some of the other graveyard enablers / hate cards that sit around in our cube right now.
Yeah, I think that's a reason why this is it's fun to do this episode, or the episodes we've been doing, because we do just kind of approach our cube slightly differently. I don't actually even play the Insidious Roots stuff in my cube, and so that's that hasn't had as big of an impact on me this year, but I can totally see that, and I do think Roots is a good card for our cube. Some of the archetypes that have had a real a big year have been food and kind of non-creature permanent recursion and the blue draw 2 stuff. We'll get into this a little bit later, but so for me, the cards that I were thinking about were all cards that got better because of those archetypes. So I've got Welcome to Sweet Tooth and Witch's Vanity. These are already good cards, obviously. But the fact that they work really well in the food space, while also being these non-creature permanents that you can keep recurring with stuff like Essence Reliquary and Sunblessed Healer, I think that for me, these are just now kind of slam dunk first picks whenever I see them in packs. And the other category I had were some of these blue draw 2 enablers that also are permanents that you can recur. So this is Kasmina, the Planeswalker from War of the Spark, the Bath Song, which lets you just draw multiple cards for multiple turns in a row. And then the Modern Age, which is similar to the Bath Song, a little bit more small ball. If I had to pick one card overall, I think I'd go with the Bath Song, just because I've seen it now a number of times in play, returning your Sneaky Snackers, making 1/1s off of Mischievous Mystic, I think before it was a little bit more of a meme in my cube where it was a personal favorite, and now I think it actually is legitimately quite strong in that kind of blue draw 2 space.
Mm-hmm. All cards that play well with Teld's pick for the year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm not sure there's ever been a better time in Magic's history to be a Core Skyfisher fan. This card's, everybody knows this is my favorite common/uncommon card of all time. I just absolutely adore the card, and man, this year was good for it. It's gotten to the point now where we picked up so many combo pieces, mostly off of rooms out of Duskmourn. Those cards ended up playing extremely well, particularly like stuff like Surgical Suite. You can do the core Skyfisher, graveyard loopy stuff, and there's basically everything now has an ETB. And so the downside, quote unquote, of course, Skyfisher having to return a permanent is now it's slowly but surely becoming pure upside on top of being an overstated creature. It's just continues to get better. I think Vesperal Arc, another card that I know Tim's not very high on, that I personally really like, I think gets better over time as we get more of these tiny creatures with amazing abilities. Last year we got stuff like Norn's Inquisitor, and then this year, I don't know how good it actually is, but we do have like Dragon Tamer this year. We got the Guarded Heir. We picked up Marionette Apprentice, which is very good. So there's just a lot of very small creatures that they keep printing, these small utility creatures. We keep defining keep explaining in our peasant stuff that these cards kind of define our peasant cube. And Vesperal Arc just keeps getting new targets and new synergies. Also, we'll talk about this later, but I think the entire green-black graveyard package got better. Tim mentioned that with the root stuff. And then obviously Tyvar Stand, this was a banner year for it. It's one of the best cards in our mainline cube, and it got banned out of our peasant cube this year for just being like kind of unbeatable, especially since everything is a little bit slower and more expensive. Just like you lose on tempo and then you die. It's the same thing in the main cube, but here it just feels so much worse for some reason.
Yeah, and a note on the Skyfishers. Not only did Skyfishers get better, right, because of rooms and sagas and more things to reset permanent base removal, but we also just got way more Skyfishers. We got a Fear of Isolation from Duskmourn. We got the frog. We got a green Skyfisher this year, like just a straight up 3-mana 3/3 pick up a permanent, Sticky Tongue Sentinel or whatever it's called, and it's just like, okay, we can't. The cube can't be all Skyfishers and Skyfisher targets.
But
then we're just.
But can it? It absolutely can.
I feel like we shifted away from the whole like Peasant Cube is just Mole Drifters thing, but now it's Peasant Cube is Mole Drifters disguised as core Skyfisher.
See, here's the thing too: is I really appreciate WotC printing these in different colors. I can't wait till we get our black and red ones next year.
Yeah, we already had the red one. We have Norin, the wary from Duskmourn.
Yeah. Sorry. Sure. See, the thing is that I explained in an earlier Peasant update video that we're not allowed to have all the Skyfishers because apparently having nothing but white 2-drops be Skyfishers isn't okay. But if they print them in other colors, I can just make an argument for a couple of them in every color.
Plus, you have different flavors of Skyfishers. You can pick up your cards from the battlefield. You can pick them up from the graveyard. Maybe next we'll get to be able to pick things up from exile. There's so much possibility here.
There really is. And I actually like the shout of the Bath Song is a card I eyeball a lot, as like, maybe we should try that one out. That card's just kind of cool and fun to play with.
I do love cards that let you loop your graveyard. I'm big. I have big Sand Black energy when it comes to those kind of cards.
Yeah, and I wanted to, like, originally when we were putting this list together, I wanted to kind of like do spoiler tags on things, but we came up with so many different answers as it is that that felt unnecessary.
Oh, Teld, you have to pick your one card.
Of course, Skyfisher. Okay, yeah, Core Skyfisher is my number one. I just wanted to mention those other cards.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, so Skyfisher, Scrap Gorger, and
Bath Song.
Yep, those get the STONKS Award here. Next, we have the Showstopper. Ding, ding, ding. This award goes to the biggest surprise of the year, something that was unexpectedly really good, something that was like the type of card where it's like, let's try this out, let's see what it does, and boom, it's like a mainstay of your cube, or it didn't latch on right away, and later on down the line, it was like, oh, this card is actually just like a peasant staple at this point. So my answer, a card that's going to come up a decent number of times throughout this recording, Heartfire Hero, the mouse that could 1-mana red creature with a Valiant whenever it becomes the target of a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn gets a +1/+1 counter, and then when it dies, it hits. Is it any target? It's any target, right? It hits any target equal to its power.
Each opponent. It is not, in fact, a removal spell.
Okay. It's each opponent. I want it to be even better. We first saw this card. Teld and I were like, you only need to get 1 counter on this to make it a 2/2, in which case it's fantastic. There's a lot of things like equipment and combat tricks are getting a lot better to throw around to trigger Valiant. Turns out this card triggers a lot. It is a huge threat when it triggers. It's archetype defining on its own as like, combat tricks and things that trigger Valiant the deck. And then like it's probably Red's best 1-drop at this point. So a card that we considered a test card that at this point I think is like a mainstay until something really drastic happens. That's going to be my showstopper for the year.
You know, an uncommon is good when it has an entire Pioneer deck built on its back.
Yeah, this card has some brutal starts.
I was playing my cube, I don't know, last weekend or a couple weekends ago, and my opponent got their hero up to a 7/7, and I just forgot that it tomes you when it dies, and I just got. I was like, I'm just dead to this right now. But the only reason why it's not the showstopper for me is I thought it was going to be pretty good, but it definitely is. I think in the end it's been even better than I thought it would be. So for me, I've got 2 cards I was thinking about here because, as you said, I'm always thinking about Peasant. I'm always making tier lists as they're spoiling cards. I'm thinking about, okay, does this quite get there? Does this push something else out? And so there's 2 cards this year that just didn't even make my list as a card to think about for Peasant, and both ended up being, I think, pretty good, and in one case, extremely good. So the first card is Dreadwing Scavenger. We failed to talk about this in our Foundations Peasant review. We we didn't see it. Not only did it end up being, I think, the best Peasant card in Foundations Limited, I think by a good amount. Actually, in the end, I haven't looked at the stats lately, but I think the data was suggesting it was pretty insane in that format. But it also works so well with all the blue and black, draw 2, draw 3 synergies that we've gotten over the course of the year. So it slots in so well, and it also was really powerful in its format. So totally missed it. But that's not the award winner for me. The award winner is A Killer Among Us. I absolutely love this card. We're gonna talk about it multiple times. It's gonna win other less positive awards as we go on. But I was having an argument with somebody about this just this week. I think this might be Green's just best 5-drop period in all of Peasant. Now that might be a bit of a hot take, but I'm not going to read the card because it's impossible to read.
It's going to get read later.
Yeah, but it just makes a ton of cardboard, and I love cards that make tons of cardboard. And nobody saw this before the set came out. This wasn't a card that even somebody like Alex Nikolic calls. I think he's maybe the best card evaluator in the business right now.
Oh, this is one of my few hits of the year. I always champion this card from day one.
Well, there you go. So for me, I didn't see it coming. It ended up being a mythic uncommon in Karlov Manor, and I think it's insane in Cube. So that's definitely my showstopper of the year.
Mm-hmm. The first one's not even the first one's manageable and has a really fun mini game to it, but it's when you play the second Killer Among Us and you still have some of the other tokens floating around that it gets really, really dicey for your opponent.
How much you'd be able to play it multiple times in Cube, perhaps with a Core Sky Fisher or Core Sky Fisher.
Well, this is a permanent that just puts itself in the graveyard too.
Yeah. So my number one is really Heartfire Hero. I think that card is the undisputed card of the year, personally. But I did want to mention one other card that we were a little on the fence about. We weren't sure how it was going to play out. It ended up being a very powerful archetype in our cube, which is the Insidious Roots. And part of this is just how much support the green-black graveyard stuff got over the course of the year. But Insidious Roots was a card that people were like, oh, is this card actually good? Is this card playable? And then a week later, they were like, oh, this card needs to be banned because we've won 3 weeks in a row with Insidious Roots. And it hasn't quite played out that broken since then, but it's been a good role-playing, very powerful engine card that you can build around if you get it early in your deck. It fits into what green black is just naturally doing at this point, and it usually generates a pretty solid amount of power and toughness over the course of a game. So just a really powerful engine card that we weren't sure was going to be good, and a lot of people hated on it in Murders as well. So just wanted to throw that one out there. But Heartfire Hero is undisputed card of the year for me.
Insidious Roots is interesting because it's one of the only cards I think I've ever played in Peasant Cube where it's strategically correct to hate it when you see it some amount of the time. Like, just take it and rip up the cardboard so that somebody else can't get it. There are decks that can't beat this card. It is mean. It is mean-spirited. But, like, if I was playing, like, a blue X control deck, like a really long game control deck that doesn't play to the board very well, like, I would see this and be like, I don't know that I have a plan to beat this card. I would just rip it up out of the table.
So slide aside, but I was talking about this specifically a couple weeks ago with somebody that I think we have enough of these type of cards these days because of all of the different sagas that we have and class enchantments and Essence Reliquary and Insidious Roots, etc., that you just need to be playing more enchantment and artifact interaction than ever before. Because otherwise, there's very little counterplay to some of these cards if you're just playing a creature deck or a counterspell deck or a Doomblade deck.
They're also making the enchantment removal in general is also like slightly more main deckable than it used to be. Like there's cards like Paw Patch Formation and Witch Enchanter that you can slot into cubes if you are looking for more enchantment removal without just playing like a Naturalize or a Wilt or something stupid like that.
Yeah, they also make the Rec Sages better. Like cards like Stormkill Vanguard and Hivespine Wolverine are just very solid cards you can put in your deck, and they do the thing. So I think we're getting, they're recognizing, I think, that a lot of these cards are very difficult to interact with, so they're giving us much more main deckable cards, and those cards stocked went up a lot too. We could have mentioned those in the
Collective Resistance from MH3. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's a good one. Yeah. Okay, so moving on. This one, I'm going to officially adopt the title of the Seasoned Awardenguard Award for this one. I would call it the Lantern Bearer Award, but that's more tuned towards the mainline cube and the impact that Lantern Bearer had there. But just to fill people in, Seasoned Awardenguard, which I don't think comes up in any of our lists today, is a really dinky like token payoff card from Bloomburrow that we tried out in both of our cubes, and people would not touch it. It was the like chopped liver of Magic the Gathering for us, where like it get 15 pick every time. Even decks that you think could play Seasoned Awardenguard, people were like, I'm not doing that. So it's like a huge letdown. But the Seasoned Awardenguard Award is going to go to the most disappointing Peasant card of 2024. Not the worst card, but the card that you thought was going to be good and ended up underperforming by a decent margin. And mine's going to go to Hydroelectric Specimen, which is the blue MDFC creature from Modern Horizons 3. This is the 3-mana 1/4 with flash, and when it enters, you can change the target of an instant or sorcery to it. And then it's one of those bolt lands on the back where you can pay 3 life to have the land enter untapped or just have it enter as a tapped island. The reason I gave this award to this card is because I thought it could redirect abilities, and then playing it for the first time, it only redirects spells, which is still good some amount of the time if you nab like a bolt or you nab like your opponent's combat trick, but not being able to redirect abilities when a lot of Magic Cube revolves around ETBs is pretty rough. And the reason that disappointed me so much is because I had pegged this in my mind as a strictly better version of Mizium Meddler, which is a very similarly statted, similarly costed creature that can redirect spells and abilities, and this one just doesn't do it. So when I found that out, I was like, yeah, I'm not super into this one anymore, and I was hoping it would be a good role player. Turns out it's just not a super important card for blue.
So I think that's a good shout out. I first feel required to defend my boy Seasoned Awardenguard because I don't think it's very disappointing. It's not very good, but it's fine. I don't know. I think it's decent. But I also play a lot of tokens in my cube. I think a full third of my list makes tokens, so it just is more often going to be that 3/2 that you care about. But anyways, I digress. There's two cards that really stood out for me here. One is Bushy Bodyguard from Bloomburrow. This is the 2-mana 2/1 with Offspring 2 and Forage as the Offspring comes into play to give it 3 counters. I saw this and I thought to myself that this is like a perfect cube card because it hits so many different things. It's a token creator. It works with graveyard stuff. It works with food stuff. It works with +1 counter stuff. And none of that's really very true. It just doesn't really work with anything. I think the thing that I kind of missed is that it's not a 2-mana card. You just don't want to play this for 2 mana. So it's really just a 4-mana card. But even then, it's mostly like a 4-mana 2/1 and 1/1. And it's true that you can then forage to make the 1/1 into something more substantial, but that's using up a resource that you could have used in some other way. And so you're not really getting, it's you're able to efficiently, use those resources to make 3 counters. That's nice, but the full output that you're getting is just not that impressive for a 4-mana card, which is really what this is. You're never playing this for 2 mana. So anyways,
I also had that pegged as a big bridge card for a bunch of different archetypes, and it just fell flat.
No, but the award winner for me for the year, not particularly close, is Outlaw Stitcher. Now, I do want to be clear. I've had some folks tell me that this is still a fine cube card. I have yet to try it in cube specifically. When I saw this spoiled, I told many people, I think probably even included in your Discord, that I thought that this was the most important blue peasant printing of all time. I think I said that it was easily, immediately the best blue card in Peasant Cube, and that's not really true. It's definitely not those things. It was a huge disappointment in Thunder Junction. Also, I still don't exactly understand why. I mean, I have some theories, but there's so much promise behind this card of a blue card that just makes this giant threat, and that just doesn't really happen. That's not how it really works. The
plot cost was just too expensive, right?
Yep.
It was 5 to plot.
Yeah, it's too expensive. And you're very rarely double spelling with this. Yep.
I do remember when OTJ was in spoiler season, though. I was right there with you. I was like, man, this is like an A-tier blue card, first pickable. Like, good, I'm just gonna windmill slam this, and it's gonna be great. But yeah,
this is the same set that gave us a Slick Shot Lockpicker, the uncommon Snapcaster Mage. Yeah.
Well, I think in the set, Loan Shark ended up being better, which was like the common plot card that nobody was talking about ahead of time. So yeah.
Yeah, I actually have another OTJ plot card as my letdown of the year. So I felt like Rictus Robber was just so clearly a slam dunk black card. I was like, okay, you play it on 3, and then from there you either, you're just gonna like sack off one of your things because black has a lot of sack support, or because it isn't limited to your cards, it's like you can just Doomblade and then you're gonna get like 6/5 worth of stats for 3 mana, and it's gonna be awesome. And for whatever reason, this card just like, you can't, it doesn't work. It just doesn't ever do the thing. And even when you do, you don't feel like you really got away with anything. I'm still like in the back of my mind a little confused how like 3 mana 6/5 isn't good, but it is what it is.
It's,
I think all the plot cards,
these 2 plot cards, a lot of the problem being that they're face up and your opponent can anticipate a lot, especially Rictus Robber being a morbid trigger is just like, if your opponent sees your morbid cards, like it's a lot easier to make sure it doesn't happen.
That's a huge deal. I think giving away information for free is a lot worse than it might seem. And so I think for all these plot cards, you're just never really supposed to plot them, at least in Cube. But that just then makes them a lot less interesting or exciting. So plot, I think overall as a mechanic ended up kind of failing. A lot of people were excited for it, and it just didn't really quite get there.
Well, it's funny because in our mainline cube, our plot cards, you generally plot, right? Like you almost always plot your Railway Brawler. You almost always plot your Slick Shot Lockpicker, or Slick Shot Show Off, excuse me. So at the mainline cube, you do that a lot more frequently.
There's also cards like the Coyote and Highway Robber, but those, like, you can plot in on turn 2 is a lot different than plotting on turn 5.
Well, also, I never plot the Coyote. I'm always just using, playing that on turn 2 to get my 1-drop +1/+1 and attack with haste, But I do hear you, especially the rare cards. I think make the power output you're getting for plotting is higher, but just not for some of these peasant cards.
Yeah, and to be fair, the part of the safety valve with Railway Brawler, I think in our cube, is that if you're the green deck, you're also playing Tyvar Stand, and so a lot of times what you do is you plot it, and then you you play on the next turn, you play like a 4-drop plus Tyvar Stand held up, and you just win the game. So there's stuff like that you can do too that are just a little more forgiving. But overall, I do feel like these plot cards were really, really sweet in their native limited environment, but for some reason just didn't really make the jump over to cube outside of some occasional plot utility, like plotting in the face of obvious counterspell or something like that.
There's some of the cards like Aloe Alchemist give you a trigger when you plot it. So
that's a card I plot. That's true.
Yeah, you gain back some of the tempo for actually using a turn to just not affect the board. Okay, so that moves us into our next category, which is the Anger Mismanagement Award, which goes to the best aggro card of the year. And a lot of decent contenders. I wanted to give this one to Heartfire Hero as well, but that's a little bit more of a build-aroundy type card. I'm going to go ahead and give this to Case of the Gateway Express, which has been a really impressive card from Murders at Karlov Manor. This is the 1 in a white enchantment case that comes in and deals damage to target creature equal to the number of creatures you control, which generally is like a good removal spell, a good enough removal spell, I should say. We play cards like Kabira Takedown and things like that, and that form of removal usually gets the job done. You would prefer for it to be an instant on something like Thraben Charm, but at sorcery speed, it still usually kills a creature. And then if you solve the case by attacking with 3 or more creatures during the same turn, you get a permanent +1/+0 Anthem effect to your entire board, which honestly, a removal spell that sticks around and starts pumping your board after that, which it's not super hard to solve this case in the decks that are dedicated to going wide or just being aggro decks in general. I found this card to be super impressive to the point where, like, sometimes people will cast this spell and their opponents will just scoop. Because they know, like, if you ever get the turn where you kill a thing and solve it during the same turn, your opponent is, like, so far on the back foot. Plus, obviously, similar to all the sagas and other stuff that we've mentioned, it's a core Skyfisher target. It's a permanent that sits in play, which means that there are ways to pick it up, reuse it, and kill off another creature, which can be a little bit awkward with the way cases work. Cases were not a slam dunk for the year, but no. In my opinion. But I think this is an exceptionally powerful card for a white aggro deck.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think there's a lot of similarities between that card and Painter's Studio, the room from Duskmorn, yes, where it's like you get this half of the card is this bonus to attacking, and the other half is like a value piece. But yeah, I definitely think Case is very good and has stood up well in my cube as well. So I have 2 different answers here. One is, again, in part because of the shift in design philosophy with play boosters. Some of your listeners might not be aware, but they pretty intentionally reduced the density of 1-drops this year as a response to people like Marshall Sutcliffe from Limited Resources complaining that we were getting too many good 1-drops. So they, we stopped getting, for instance, a red 1-drop common in every set. Like, that's just not a thing that they're guaranteeing we're getting going forward. Whereas in the past, we were getting at least one of those, and in some sets 2. But it's pretty clear to me that what they did, the trade-off there, is that the amount of power they're putting into these 2-drop uncommon creatures is kind of insane. Especially in MH3, there was Glyph Elemental, Amped Raptor, and a million other cards that you could put here. But there's also, Neighborhood Guardian from MCAM is a kind of insane aggro too. There's so many different crazy 2-drops. We got multiple different red 2-drops that have haste, whereas in the past we had literally zero red 2-drops with haste, and now I think we got 4 this year or something like that. So we're getting just a ridiculous amount of power at the 2-drop aggro slot now because they're reducing the 1-mana creatures. It seems to me like at least that's an intentional thing. But that's not the winner for me. The winner for me this year by far is Sundering Eruption. This is the MDFC from MH3 where it's a land on one side that you can put into play untapped by paying 3 life. And then it's a falter, essentially, on the other side that makes your opponents unable to block, or makes it harder for them to block. I chose this because, for me, if I'm touching red and I'm aggressive, there's no other card that I would rather see than this. It's a card that I will always play. It will always make my deck no matter what. And no matter how many playables I already have, Impact 3 or whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm always going to play it. And it's a card that has probably won me more games than any other individual card in comparison to the card that it's replacing, because it's just replacing a land, and land is never going to win me the game, whereas Sundering Eruption wins the game quite often. So, and what I found is, you talked about these Insidious Roots decks, these engine decks that are able to really grind out value into the late game. And what I find is that it's pretty important for the red decks to have access to ways to end the game, like Sundering Eruption, to have options against those style decks. So yeah, very impressed with Sundering Eruption. Always play it. My best aggro card of the year.
Yeah, I think we explicitly did not include Sundering Eruption just because, I think our opinion was that if the green-black deck gets to a point where the game has gone on long enough that they have, 20 creatures in play, they shouldn't lose to a random top deck.
Sure.
But I understand that's a design difference. Card is amazing. It was incredible in the limited format too. For example, the Eldrazi
feels exclusion, not a power level exclusion.
Yeah, the Eldrazi Pillow Fort stuff in MH3. That was one of the ways to sidestep all of that. So mine is kind of a mix of your 2 answers in a way. I just have the entire. It's like 4 cards. The white MKM cards, like that set. White was incredible. We got Novice Inspector, Neighborhood Guardian, Case. There's also, the +2/+1.
On the job.
Thank you. Yeah, just all those cards are just really, really powerful. They've, a lot of them are just great cards for white aggro. I think Neighborhood Guardian or Case is definitely the best of the bunch. I think Neighborhood Guardian is the one that I get the most like enjoyment playing though, because you're just always trying to like min-max how you're going to stack your triggers and open up your attacks. I know that Tim's not a big fan of functional reprints, but I think it's really important to have these Thraben Inspectors at 1. I think like you want to be playing cards on 1, but the Savannah Lion Conundrum continues to be a problem if you're not playing these kind of cards. And then, on the job being just a pump spell you can fire off and just recoup the value on the back end if you don't kill your opponent, just gives it an entirely new level of flexibility, because now you're not just having it in the game with it, you can just use it to make some good trades. So yeah, I think MKM was a huge boon to white aggro in general. I think these cards are all just game defining for this archetype.
For sure. Yeah, and I'm not a huge fan of Novice Inspector existing, but it does exist. So double Thraben Inspectors for everyone. I want to take a moment to just zoom in on Glyph Elemental. Has this card proven to be like problematic for people? This is the 2-mana 2/2 landfall, put a +1 counter on it, but if it's bestowed to something, it puts a +1 counter. Or it gives the enchanted creature +1/+1 for each counter on it, and then like when that dies, it pops out as a full-bodied Glyph Elemental. I've heard from 2 separate people at this point, like, say something along the lines of, I can't believe you're still playing that card in your cube. Like, the card is, like, way too powerful as a 2-drop or whatever. Does that line up with the way you guys have seen this card play out?
Yeah, pretty much every time you see it, it is a 2-mana aura that gives a creature +2/+2 by the end of it, and it's like a 2-mana 4/4 on top of that. I do think if I was just going to pick out a single card, this is probably the best white card of the year. Maybe the best. It's one of the better cards of the year. But yeah, Glyph Elemental is really, really powerful. It's basically Peasant Bristly Bill. We've seen how powerful that card is, and it's obviously not as good, but like it's quite powerful, especially if you follow it up with like a landscape or something like that. So that you can double trigger it immediately. I've seen games just completely revolve around this card. So like, I think it's a card that I don't think it's been problematic, because I don't think pure white aggro of that style is like at its best in our cube. I think it typically is more of a go wide thing, but Glyph Elemental is just a very, very scary 2-drop. That's also a very, very scary aura.
Yeah. I mean, obviously first of all, it's on my list. So yes, I think it's a very, very good card. I think we had this conversation, Teld. I don't really worry so much about power outliers, so I would never consider taking it out. But to me, one of the things that makes it or keeps it in check is it's just not a very good top deck. So it's hard for me to think of it as that oppressive of a card. Yes, on turn 2 it's great, but it's also, if you're packing enchantment removal in your cube, then it's still a thing that can just get killed, and then it doesn't really do anything. This is not to say it's not fantastic. I think it is fantastic. It might be the best white card of the year. I could believe that, but I don't think it's a card worth banning if that's the question.
I also don't. Though my experience playing against it is that it's always 1 power or 1 toughness out of range of whatever I need to use to kill it.
Sure, yeah.
Like I have my fight spell and my 4-power creature on board, but they just made it a 5/5. Or I have my Obnixilus is a cruelty, but they just got it up to 6/6. It's like it's always out of range for some reason. And then when you kill it, you still have to deal with the damn Glyph Elemental too. So I do quite enjoy the card. It's very powerful though.
I think as we move forward, probably into next year, we're talking about, these bringing more disenchants in. I think that's one area this card could suffer from, is that if you just disenchant the card itself instead of killing the creature and then having to kill the Glyph Elemental, a lot of times killing the Glyph Elemental will just get rid of the problem, because all the stats are tied to that card. So if you have more disenchants, you can just deal with it that way.
Yeah, we'll have to keep an eye on enchantment stuff moving forward for sure. Next award up, the One Step at a Time Award. This goes to the best/sweetest attrition card of the year. I had to add sweetest in there because that let me actually justify my answer. If I was going with the actual best attrition card, I probably couldn't have slotted this in. But mine's going to go to Defiled Crypt/Cadaver Lab. This is the mono black room that you can pay a black mana to pick a creature back up out of your graveyard, or you can pay 4 mana to unlock an enchantment that says whenever a creature leaves your graveyard, or rather, it's whenever a card leaves your graveyard for the first time each turn, you make a 2/2 enchantment zombie creature token. And this plays perfectly into the Insidious Roots package that we have, while also being kind of like a very slow, grindy mechanic. It's got that chalk outline vibe going on. I just found that this slotted perfectly into what our green-black decks were doing, and it's really fun to play with. I mean, the way to think about it is as a 5-mana Gravedigger that then leaves behind this enchantment that can pump out additional 2/2s, and it's slow as all hell, so you kind of like have to support it with a lot of removal and a lot of ways to get to the late game. But I just enjoy it, and we're not really going to talk in depth about too many mechanics here. I was going to do like a best mechanic of the year, but I think I took it out at some point. But I will say rooms. I really enjoy playing with rooms, just at face value, but also when you start factoring in like all of the loops and ways to pick them up and stuff like that. It's just contributing to that objectification of Magic and Peasant Cube in general. And I think the card is good enough on its own, and then once you start factoring ways to rebuy it, it gets really loopy. Though black, I don't think black has a native way to pick up an enchantment. I think it does rely on the other colors to do it, but you're usually playing like black-green or black-white or something like that, and you'll have your Skyfisher or you'll have your Sticky Tongue Sentinel, and being able to pick this card up is really sweet. So that's going to be mine. I do not claim this as the best attrition card of the year, but I will claim it as the sweetest.
I do think one really sweet thing about that card is because it's not specifically creatures. I haven't really seen much of this, but there's conceivably a home in like blue-black where you're running like Halo Forger and the flashback control spells and like your Slickshot Lockpicker and stuff like that, and you're just kind of doing that to generate value. It probably wouldn't go as hard as like a green-black Insidious Roots deck because there's just less ways to do it. But you know, it is a way you could do stuff like, you know, pick up your Shipwreck Dowser and then you Shipwreck Dowser back a card and then like you've made 2/2/2s and that's just like the stats you need to turn the corner.
Mm-hmm. And then one more thing on this kind of package of cards too is the way that they've repurposed Graveyard Hate, where you'll start targeting yourself with things like Cling to Dust and Armored Scrap Gorger just to kind of get the engine going. It also it's a little annoying when your opponent's like, or when you're like, I'm playing against the graveyard deck, I should bring in something like Scrabble and Claws to kind of deal with their graveyard, but then they land something like this in play, and like your Graveyard Hate actually backfires against you. I'm still not sure where I land on that dynamic, but it is interesting that like there are cards in the graveyard style decks that actually fight back against the Graveyard Hate.
Yeah, we also had we're big fans of Eviscerator's Insight, and one of the sweet things there is once you get one trigger off the Cadaver Lab, you can like flash this back for 5 mana out of the graveyard, sack your zombie, make a new zombie, and draw 2 cards, which is, you know, is that like the best thing you can be doing? Probably not, but is it sweet? Yes, it will make you will have big brain energy going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. I like the shout out about rooms in general. I feel like rooms were a big win for Peasant. There's a number of rooms that I think are worth playing. My actual answer here is Essence Reliquary, but I'm going to let Teld talk about that one. My second answer would be Emrakul's Messenger, and I threw it on here because my guess is that other people don't necessarily even think of this card as much anymore because Mischievous Mystic came out, and I think for some folks, they see Mystic as just a better card, and they just replaced the Messenger with Mystic. But I would encourage folks to try playing with both. I think that I'm really obsessed with the blue draw 2 kind of deck in my cube right now, and it works mostly because I play with both of the cards. But Messenger specifically, if you've never seen Messenger with Morbid Opportunist in play, my God, it just draws all the cards and makes all the cardboard you could want. So I'm a big fan of the blue draw 2 stuff, and I think Messenger wants the game to go long, whereas Mystic just kind of ends the game pretty quickly. So they're a little bit at odds with each other sometimes. But if you have both in play, then you're also doing really well. But yeah, I've really enjoyed Messenger, and it encourages you to play this more attrition style game with blue, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, we had for a while with Messenger there, and you can still do it with Mystic in our main cube, but like the that plus Yawgmoth combo was a thing people were doing, and it sounds like with Morbid Opportunist, with the Messenger, you actually kind of are doing the same thing, just like a
little slower, but yeah, basically,
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, Morbid Opportunist is a card we also don't run just for power level reasons. That card's quite impressive.
It's a house.
But so my number one pick of the year is Essence Reliquary. It is the king of all Skyfishers. It's all I want to be doing in Magic the Gathering is picking up permanents and replaying them. You know, we haven't had it come up yet, but we also do have the soft combo in this cube of Journey to Nowhere plus Essence Reliquary, where you hold priority and bounce the journey, which I got to do that in Constructed one time, playing in Artisan League, and got to just lock my green-white opponent out of the game by just doing that every turn, which was really sweet. But yeah, there's it's a card that, you know, if you like Core Skyfishers, I actually think it's worse than Core Skyfisher, if I'm being completely honest, only because Core Skyfisher puts so much stats into play immediately. So it's just a little more tempo positive, whereas the Reliquary is very much a game plan. But Reliquary will grind out games that you have no business being in. I was playing a game the other day where me and my opponent were both just sitting there grinding. They were making 2/2 zombies, and I was making 3/3s off of rebuying Norn's Inquisitor over and over again. And then they killed the Norn's Inquisitor, and I think I Sunblessed Healer or Hero the Dunes it back and started picking them up again. Just the kind of things Essence Reliquary allows you to do is just super powerful. It's super effective especially in our environment where games tend to be a little more grindy. I think it's got the potential to be an all-star. We haven't really seen much of it yet because we just added it. We originally passed on it for the kind of gameplay patterns it would create, but our community kept asking for it, so we're trying it. And the one game I drew it in my last deck was the one game of the night that I won. So
I do think it's the dirty little secret of Essence Reliquary is it's not nearly as good as it is memorable, is the way to put it. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the stats from MH3 draft, the top player data on this card was not very good. I think the top players love playing with this card. They just don't necessarily win a ton with it. I do think it's way better in Cube, and you're right, the Journey to Nowhere interaction is very strong. And I do think cards like this, again, is a reason why you really do want to have plenty of disenchant-like effects around, just so that, the player who would otherwise be salting off because they feel like there's nothing they can do about this situation, you can at least say, well, hey, look, prioritize disenchants in the draft. But yeah, I do think ultimately it's more memorable than good, but it is still, I think, a solid card and worth trying out if you haven't done it before.
Oh yeah, it's a fan favorite of people in our community as well. I know Fletcher is really if Fletcher was here with us, this would be his number one pick for every category. And we actually took a poll in our community, would you be fine with this card showing up in the Peasant Cube, knowing that you are going to lose super hard to it some percentage of the time in a situation where you can't get out from underneath it. And people I think maybe there was one vote for no, but people the people engaged with that poll basically overwhelmingly said, yeah, let's play with the card. And then we were like, should we be bringing in a braid alongside this just to up the artifact removal count by 1 at least? I don't think we actually pulled the trigger on doing that, but it was part of the conversation because my memory, every time I think of this card and how sweet it was in Retail Limited, I always think back to a game where I got walked out with an opponent who had a subtlety and they had subtlety and utter insignificance in their hand. So if I ever played a creature that didn't matter, they let it resolve, and they could exile it permanently with the utter insignificance. And if I ever played a creature that did matter, they could subtlety it back to my hand and then just pick their subtlety back up.
In one of our recent drafts,
or whatever.
In one of our recent drafts, somebody had Builder's Talent plus Essence Reliquary, and then their win condition was just to replay Michiko's Reign of Truth over and over again, and that was quite hot. There's a lot of things you can do with this, assuming you've reached the state of the game where you're not dead and can afford to just kind of spin your wheels forever, and that's kind of the point.
That's the trick.
There's plenty of situations where you just die. You play this and you're dead, but yes, if you get to do the thing, it is incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, MDFCs too. MDFCs are huge with this card.
Man, Builder's Tale is a sweet card that we don't run. I do like that.
You should give it. It's right in the same lane. It's the same. Goes in the same deck. Honestly, probably better than Essence Reliquary just from a win rate perspective because it puts power and toughness into play. But it's not a sweet. Obviously
for
not
sure.
A sweet, but it's a very good card.
Well, it's funny because the original draft of our outlines, Denelius added a category that was I forget what the exact wording was, but it was Planeswalker-like card or Planeswalker-like mechanic of the year, and it's this is just an obvious ploy to talk about sagas and talents.
There's so many. There's so many sweet Planeswalker replacements now. They don't need to make Planeswalkers anymore. Yeah, there's
I was a stickler. I nixed that category, but it would have been nice to just gush about classes. But I guess we just did a little bit, or not classes, but yeah, I guess classes.
They're basically class and gems,
sagas and rooms and stuff like that. Not cases though. Cases are stupid. Okay, let's keep on moving. So we've got the Doomblade Award. This goes obviously to the best removal spell of the year. I thought I had a slam dunk answer, but these other ones are pretty good too. So Hunter's Talent, the green class. it's a class from Bloomburrow. This is the one that has the Rabid Bite effect. One of your creatures punches their creature, and then you just get all this extra stuff tacked on for, I think it's 2 extra mana to put it on level 2, and you can give an attacking creature +1/+0 and trample, and then for 4 extra mana, you get to start drawing a card on each end step if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. But really, I think the combination of the first 2 abilities is just enough to sell me, and if you get that 4th or that 3rd level going, like, you got a draw engine off of your Rapid Bite. That seems insane to me. So, and then obviously it's in the same color as Sticky Tongue Sentinel, which can pick it up, and then you get to fight again. Or not even fight, but punch again. So, yeah, this card has proven really good, and to the point where it's actually in our mainline cube, and I think it's a perfectly fine removal spell there. So, I thought it was an easy pick for best removal spell of the year, but there's a lot of good removal this year, apparently.
Yeah, I think it's tough to go against Hunterstown. I think I talk about that multiple times in a couple of these other awards, but I went with Sheltered by Ghosts. And the biggest reason for me is that if I see a Sheltered by Ghosts pack 1, pick 1, I can take it and basically build my whole deck around it, which, you can do the same thing for Hunterstown. As you said, you can play the Sticky Tongues to pick it up and keep replaying it. So I think there's honestly a lot of similarity between those two. With Sheltered by Ghosts, there's no card in my cube that makes me want to play basically like kind of blue-white tempo flyers than this card. I think this is the signpost blue-white tempo flying card in the cube, while also being still just obviously great in a lot of different contexts. But I had a deck, actually somebody else saw the deck that I built, and then they built basically the same deck at a later date, but where it was flyers, Sheltered by Ghosts, and then protection spells. And the whole point of the deck was just, land a flyer, put ghosts on that flyer, and then protect that flyer. And if I got to do those things, I just basically couldn't lose. So I think, brutal. Yeah, Sheltered by, for those that aren't aware, it's an Oblivion Ring that gives the creature that it gets attached to +1/+0 and lifelink, which the lifelink again just kind of, and War 2, sorry, but the lifelink just means that, yeah, if you put this on a flyer, it's pretty hard to lose if they can't deal with the creature, and it's very hard to deal with the creature. But again, with protection spells, the ward matters so much because they go to kill it with their Doomblade, they have to pay 4 mana, and you let them do that whole thing, and then you just give it protection and you keep going. So yeah, Sheltered is an insane tempo card.
Have you ever seen anyone get got by the nowhere to run, stripping ward away from this card?
In actual limited, yes. Not in cube yet, but I do play nowhere to run, so I'm sure it will come up.
Yeah, I was wrong. I was skeptical of this card, and I was super wrong. This card was brutal in retail limited, and we actually just axed it from our cube because we care about our drafters' feelings.
Luckily, I don't.
Just kidding.
One of those cards that had like almost unanimous negative feedback. People were just like, "This card is miserable to play against." So yeah, we axed that one. I do have a white card for my best one. I'm actually sure this card's better than Hunter's Talent. Hunter's Talent's probably a better individual card, but I really enjoy playing these like white mid-rangey decks. And so Case of the Gateway Express just keeps being a gift that keeps on giving. You can pick it up with your Core Skyfisher, your Essence Reliquary, you blow up a creature, and then you get to, obviously there's a little bit of anti-synergy if you're picking it up and replaying it if you're trying to solve it. But yeah, it gives you a late game plan of like your go wide deck gets a bunch of extra stats. So if you can solve it usually what you want to do is like removal spell with it and then solve it on the same turn. So just a really solid removal spell. I do want to go back to Hunter's Talent and say that I do really appreciate on this card. One of the things that makes it so powerful is sometimes these class enchantments feel like they have the cards in the wrong, or the levels in the wrong order, right? So like you want the level 3 before the level 2. But this is a card that definitely gets the levels right, where, you're getting your removal spell and then you're getting some pressure out of it. And then if the game goes long, now the mana sink ability is the draw engine. So like you've got both the tempo and attrition side covered.
Well, one of the nice things about Hunter's Talent too is that it's a secret incentive to do power 4 stuff, power 4 or greater stuff. Not really, but any like, hints or phrases that you see on cards that just make you think a little bit more about, okay, I guess I'll go in this direction. I do think makes these cards that really are just kind of rate monsters, which is all Hunter's Talent is. You're just getting so much for what you're paying. But the fact that it also then kind of pushes you slightly in a direction of an actual deck, I think makes it a lot more interesting of a cube card than it would otherwise be.
Also, I think we mentioned this in the review episode, but it helps you get there too, right? You can attack with your Sticky Tongue Sentinel and get it to 4 power so that you can trigger the end step.
Yeah, they really pushed the punch spells this year because we got Hard Hidden Question in MKM, which was 1 mana Rabid Bite for the first time, and then we got the technically strictly better version with the Eldrazi text from Modern Horizons 3. We also got Stump Stomp, which is the MDFC that just has Rabid Bite on the other end. And then we got Hunter's Talent as Rabid Bite with a whole draw engine and game plan attached to it. So like these punch spells really went overboard this year. I'm interested to see like if they maintain that momentum.
Signature Slam too. The
Bridgeworks Battle, yeah.
Bridgeworks Battle, yeah. There's a lot.
Oh yeah, Bridgeworks Battle, yeah. The Savage, just straight up monocolored Savage Smash on an MDFC. But you'll notice something about the 3 cards we picked out, all permanents for the best removal spells of the year, because one of the things you're factoring in is being able to, I guess you're not picking up Sheltered by Ghosts all the time, but you can rebuy it with your Eternal Witness style cards and stuff like that.
Well, you are if you nab a token with it. That's the nice thing. You definitely can.
True.
You know, it's really funny because I'm pretty sure if we extended this to other colors, I'm pretty sure the best removal spell for every color ends up being a permanent. You know, it's like Nowhere to Run.
Red got Torch the Witness, which was a decent one, I think.
It did, yeah, but like you're also comparing that to what like Rowl or Glassworks, which are both
Glassworks,
really good.
sure.
Yeah. Blue might be a little bit different because we're not playing. I guess we're not playing. I just noticed we're not playing the Scream card, the 1 mana card.
No, but there's Bottomless Pool. Bottomless Pool would be for blue, or maybe the blue, the Mana War replacement. I guess would be a non-permanent.
The Manifest Dread card. Unnerving Grasp, that's what it's called.
Yeah, technically not a permanent.
Yeah.
All right, next up we've got the First Day on the Job Award. This award goes to the Best New Creature of the Year, and a little bit of variation from just like Surprise Showstopper card or Best Straight Up Card of the Year. I'm going to give this award to Hollow Marauder from OTJ. That's the 7 mana 4/2 flyer. I think it's a rogue. It's like a spirit rogue, which mattered for the set because of the outlaws. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card, and if they discarded a land or a cheap card, I think that costs 4 or less, you get to draw a card. So yeah, 7 mana price tag, but this card always costs 1 mana. Or my experience was this card is just always 1 mana. Maybe it's 2 or 3, but realistically, like you get this super, super cheap. You get a 4/2 flyer, which doesn't sound good for 7 mana, but is excellent for 1, 2, 3 mana. And then you eat your opponent's hand, and it feels like you always get to draw the card, and then you factor in all the loops and all the ways to raise dead a creature and reanimation spells. And it felt like this card could just grind your opponent into just straight up infinity, while also clocking them in the air. And like, yeah, they kill it sometimes with a shock, but you usually didn't pay a lot of mana for it, and you're sometimes even happy that it just hits the graveyard because you're like, okay, I'll go ahead and bring it back, eat another card from your hand, draw another card. And I think the trick with this too was if your opponent was empty-handed, you draw the card. Right? Like if your opponent just straight up had nothing to discard because you've looped your Marauder 3 times, you always just get up another card on an empty hand. So I found this card to be super, super egregious to the point where like I think it best new creature of the year is like I'm sure there's contention with other cards. There are probably better creatures, but maybe most enjoyable one for me to play of the year is the right way to put this. But also triggers Up the Beanstalk, which is just Up the Beanstalk is its own personal hell of a card. But yeah, I found Hollow Marauder to be just like completely over the top for our cube in particular.
Yeah, Hollow Marauder is just a ridiculous card. Like that's one of the handful of cards this year that we cut on just like pure power level. It was its own game plan.
We tried it in the mainline cube too, but it didn't quite pan out there. There isn't as much of the like fill up your graveyard really quickly type stuff going on there.
But that's also my card of like best new creature of the year. I think it's just a ridiculous card. The first time you cast it was a 3-for-1, and then every time you looped it afterwards just was kind of rubbing salt in the wound. That being said, I did want to throw an honorable mention out to Chris. Everybody hates Chris. And if you've been in chat with our people, Writhing Chrysalis, MH3, man, it messed with people's brains. I'm telling you, the people who played that format a lot, they've got some emotional damage there, and it's all due to a certain 4 mana 2/3. Or if you ask them, it's a 4 mana 7/8 even in Peasant Cube.
Writhing Chrysalis did a number on people. For sure.
Well, it's just a kind of an outrageous design. Like, what in the world were they thinking? I don't understand how that made it out.
Yeah.
But what can you do? On Hollow Marauder, I really like it. I mean, I don't ban things for power level basically ever, but I like it because, again, it's one of these cards that you can take early and it just kind of shape your whole deck around it, which I think is cool for a strong card to also be a card that you kind of want to actively build around. But for me, the creature that I'm going to remember this year for, when I look back or think back on 2024, I'm going to think about Heartfire Hero second, and then number 1, Mischievous Mystic. I've already talked about it a couple times. It's the Foundations card we just got, 2-mana, 2/1 flyer that makes a 1/1 flyer whenever you draw your second card each turn. I think this is just a card that blue desperately needed, and it creates kind of a whole new archetype on its own, while also just being a good card in a lot of different contexts. And yeah, I think for me, blue is just really struggling for the entire time I've had my cube to kind of have its own identity that was reasonably worth doing, and Mystic gives it that identity, and it's a little fragile. I'm not saying that it's not quite as powerful as something like Hollow Marauder or even Heartfire Hero, but just for doing the thing that blue desperately needed out of its cheap creatures, I think it's gets that award for me.
Do you think the Emrakul's Messenger and Mischievous Mystic would still hit if they were 1/1 flyers? Because I think the thing that stands out to me about them is that they're actual clocks in the air while doing what they do.
Absolutely. I was playing against a blue-black draw-2 deck a couple weeks back, and I had a better long game plan than even what they were doing, and they were able to tempo me out because of the flyers. Like over the course of 2 or 3 turns, they were just able to kill me very quickly. So yeah, it's the fact that they're legitimate bodies while also being these engine cards that makes them so strong.
I wonder how much they experiment with this same space in like different parts of the curve, right? Like I could see like a 3-mana 2/2 flyer, a Windrake or something that spits out 2/2s when you draw your second card each turn, right? Like maybe a slightly understated body on curve, but you get bigger flyers for doing the thing. I wonder if they're going to play around with this, because it was really weird to see, not weird necessarily, but it was interesting to see Emrakul's Messenger come out as like, oh, this is a cool new print for blue. This is doing something that blue hasn't really done before, and then immediately see Mischievous Mystic the same year doing a very, very similar thing on the same stat line.
Well, it's interesting because they've given us these draw 2 payoffs in the past. They gave us, like we were talking about before, the blue-red enchantment that I've already forgotten the name of again.
Improbable Alliance.
Yes, Improbable Alliance. That makes 1/1s. This is just a much better card because it's a creature itself that can attack. But the main payoffs that we've gotten in the past add counters to the creature. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is just their way of realizing that that's just not good enough as a payoff in general. Like if you think about a Johnny's Pride Mate versus Cat Collector as well, it's like more and more they're kind of realizing that payoffs that just make your one creature bigger just don't work in a world where you have to be giving all the colors access to really good 1-for-1 removal. So I think they've noticed that. They're like, okay, we need to give a bigger payoff for this effect, and I could definitely imagine in 2025 and beyond getting more and more of these more powerful like card advantage or object advantage payoffs for drawing 2. So yeah, we'll have to see.
Yeah, and the problem with those like creatures that get bigger when you draw cards is like, look at they have to stat them so low and like bump the cost up to kind of like make up for the fact that they can become huge. So look at like the Clinquent from Foundations, and we've had Onereophage in the past as these 4-mana like 1/2 and 1/1 flyers that get bigger over time. Like yeah, they can become 7/7s at some point, but they're just gonna die to like a cantrip and shock of some sort before they get going. So I agree, that's not really the way to go, is to try and put all your eggs in one basket on like one giant blue creature. Though maybe, I don't know, if you had like a 2-mana 2/1 flyer that got bigger every time you drew a card. Like,
that would be worth it, probably, yeah.
That would be kind of insane, actually. But maybe if you drew your second card each turn, put a +1 counter on like a 2-mana 2/1 flyer, like if you're going to bump it down to a reasonable card to start with, that's going to be really powerful, but they don't really do that. So I like this design space of like, hey, make some tokens when you draw your second card each turn, especially in blue with the Messenger. Like making mana dorks is really interesting because blue gets to do some really gross stuff when you ramp. It doesn't normally get to ramp, but when you get access to extra mana in blue, you can pull off some pretty powerful stuff. So yeah, I think Mischievous Mystic's going to come up again once or twice through the rest of these. But let's go ahead and move on to the Disembodied Award. We just talked about the Best Creature of the Year. Let's go ahead and award the Best Non-Creature of the Year. And I do think you had a good note in here that in the spirit of the award, it should probably be something that doesn't just like create a creature. So I sidestepped my real answer and wrote down Lively Dirge, which I realized also just kind of creates a creature, but whatever. Lively Dirge has been just a really, really sweet card to play with. This is the Black Spree Reanimator spell that can bring back 2 creatures with total mana value 4 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and for the extra mana you can actually tutor a creature or entomb a creature from your library straight into the graveyard. So the way it plays out is you almost always like get your best 2-drop from your deck, throw it in the graveyard, bring it back alongside another 2-drop in your graveyard, or you go like get your Honest Rutstein or another 3-drop, ditch it in the graveyard, bring it back, and then also bring back like whatever 1-drop you have floating around. So it's almost always bringing back 2 creatures, though, as it's been pointed out, you can also just ditch a 4-drop from your library into the graveyard and just reanimate that for 5 mana. So 5 mana, search up any 4-drop in your deck, put it into play. Pretty powerful when you start considering the ETBs on it. And I think it's just a really fun card to play. I like the spree mechanic as well, even though it's just a kicker mechanic with some extra knobs on it. So Lively Dirge has been, if not the actual best non-creature of the year, certainly one of the most fun ones for me.
Yeah, I loved Lively Dirge in OTJ. I was a huge proponent of white-black and Mardu decks, just built on kind of.
Oh, you bring back the 1-drop and the ruthless guy
Lawbringer
at the same
absolutely.
time.
Yes, that was a lot of fun. So for me, I chose Hunter's Talent here. We don't need to get more into it. I didn't have Hunter's Talent as my best removal spell of the year, because if I'm just thinking of a card that's primarily doing removal, then I do like Shelter by Ghost slightly more than Hunter's Talent. But just as a card overall, Hunter's Talent does so much more than just be a removal spell. So I think just as non-creature card of the year, Hunter's Talent wins it for me.
Yeah, I think for me, I also agree Hunter's Talent is probably the best non-creature print, but I have to admit I have a total soft spot for Repulsive Mutation at this point, and that's across both cubes. We played this in our main and our Peasant Cube. I think it's better in the mainline cube. I think the decks that want Repulsive Mutation are just better in that environment, but I do absolutely love playing Repulsive Mutation, and like I will jump through hoops to justify why my mana can support splashing one of the colors if I'm in the other one. I do think the card's legitimately powerful. One of the advantages it has in the Peasant Cube is the Fireball mode comes up a lot more, whereas in the main cube, a lot of times you're countering something and adding like 1 or 2 +1 counters. In the Peasant Cube, it's not uncommon for this card to just be big Fireball if your opponent taps out and they just die. So just a really, really sweet print. I have to shout out Chris, who obviously doesn't do Peasant stuff with this very much. Or at all anymore, but he was the only one of us that really wanted to talk about this card, and it's funny because it became one of my favorite cards of the year.
I had a draft recently where I saw Repulsive Mutation from my opponent in the first game, and in the second game they passed with a bunch of mana open, and I said, I shouldn't cast my spell because I can't beat Repulsive Mutation here. And then I thought for a second, I was like, I just can't beat Repulsive Mutation here no matter what, because they can just do it either way. It's like, all right, I guess I just lose Repulsive Mutation.
That I will say another really big knock against this card is casting it on Arena is kind of messy, and you can actually like just mess it up and misclick and like not counter anything, which I've seen happen like a number of times due to the way it's templated and the way you have to target different things. So it's a little awkward there, but very powerful card, unique card for Simic as well. The Goldilocks Award, this goes to the best gold card of the year, the best multicolor card of the year. I'm giving this, I think, hands down to Honest Rutstein, which has been like a huge surprise hit of the year, and maybe surprise hit isn't. It shouldn't have been a surprise because, like, just look what the card says. This is 3 mana for a 3/2 that brings a creature back from your graveyard to your hand, and also just is Black Lotus in play. Just gives you a bunch of free mana, makes all your creatures 1 cheaper to cast. I found this to be, like, probably the best Gravedigger that we have access to. It's 3 mana Gravedigger. They usually cost 4. It has additional upside on top of it, and it's in the color pair that wants to do like the creature loop in the most. So I find this card holds its own very well in the mainline cube, and that Peasant Cube I've come down on this card probably being like too good, but maybe we say that about a lot of cards. So yeah, Rutstein wins Goldilocks Award for me.
Yeah, I think that one of the big effects of play boosters this year is that we're seeing more and more really nuts gold cards, not just really across all colors. I think that blue green had an incredible year for gold cards, but if you just go through the year, the number of cards that I think you could bring up for this award is kind of insane. There's a lot of gold cards that I'm not playing with because there's limited slots, but you certainly could if you wanted to. In cubes, yeah.
The number of cards from Duskmourn alone,
yes,
that you could...
so many. So I think Rutstein is a good shout. I personally went with Gleaming Geardrake, and this is a card that I know plenty of people aren't playing with. It's a perfect card for my cube, which is, again, a little bit more artifact-focused, a little bit more token-focused than some cubes are. But Geardrake, it's 2 mana for a 1/1 flyer that comes with a clue token and gets bigger for every artifact you sacrifice. It's really a match in heaven with my favorite cube card, which is oh my gosh, now I'm blanking on it. The 2-mana creature that sacks artifacts to make 3/1s, and it's too early.
Sokensen
Smelter. Thank you very much. That is my favorite cube card at the moment by a lot, and it works incredibly well with Sokensen Smelter, but it works well with treasures, it works well with maps, it works well with even food. It grows out of hand very quickly, but if that's all it did, that wouldn't be good enough. But the fact that it's 2 mana for 2 objects and one of them being a card, along with being this threat that people have to really deal with, I've been very impressed with Gleaming Geardrake this year.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, especially because your environment has a lot more of the like random, just make all the things that make random game objects that happen to be artifacts, plus the artifact lands and all that sort of stuff, just are kind of scattered throughout your cube. So that makes a lot of sense. I mentioned like Repulsive Mutation, but it's obviously Rutstein for us. Like Rutstein's just it is so unbelievably broken. Definitely not. I think Tim, you said is like it's actually dishonest Rutstein because you feel like you're cheating when you play it.
Yeah.
But like to your point about this being a great year for gold cards, I mean, if our entire Gruul section came to the client this year, and three of the 4 of them are new cards, but even the Gore Clan is like one that we picked up this year. So our entire Gruul section got changed out this year. Almost our entire Golgari section got changed out this year, 3 of the 4 cards. And one of them is only holding on because we don't want to go all in on synergy. Like we're leaving one slot for kind of just like generic good card. And so just very, very impactful year. The gold cards are there's so many good ones now.
For sure. So the next category, the all the colors of the wind awards. I gotta apologize. I apparently didn't fully flesh this one out for my own answers, but this is the award that we're gonna give for the best new print in each monocolored section. And I don't think we should go into too much detail about individual cards here. So much as just go down the list. But I did have Sheltered by Ghosts for white, Fear of Isolation as the blue Skyfisher, and then Under the Skin as the green like Manifest Dread Gravedigger Eternal Witness style card. I didn't actually plug anything in for red or black, so I'll let you guys handle your lists. But yeah, without going into too much detail about every single individual card, what did you all have pegged here?
Yeah, so I had Sheltered by Ghosts in white, I had Mischievous Mystic in blue, in black Marionette Apprentice, which we haven't talked about much so far, but that's just works incredibly well in my cube as either a creature sacrifice payoff or a artifact sacrifice payoff while also being 2 objects on 1 card. It's nuts. I had Heartfire Hero in red, which you've talked plenty about, and then in green, I waffled between Under the Skin and Hunter's Talent, but decided to give Under the Skin some shine because that card is unbelievable.
The card is fantastic, yeah.
Yeah, I mostly agree with you guys. I did want to shout out just a couple of cards we haven't talked about that I thought were great prints this year. There's Plume Creed Escort in blue. That's the hexproof flash creature that like protects a creature of yours. Thoughtstalker Warlock in black, which was the Bloomburrow. I keep calling it Thought Slizzard. Yeah. Old Thought Slizzard. You just like hit your opponent and then you play a 2/2 menace that Thought seizes them. It's very, very powerful. And then also for green, I wanted to shout out Spinewood's Armadillo, which has been an absolute unit in our cube. It's one of the things that kind of locks in the green-black mid-range deck, and just Ward 3 for the most part ends up being hexproof functionally because of the limited number of spells that can kill it. And then even in the early game, you discard it, you gain some life, you fix your mana, and then you reanimate it, and you're ahead of schedule. So just a card that is arguably too good. It just is one of those ridiculous prints that I think got overshadowed a little bit by all the other ridiculous prints that happened on the back half of this year.
Yeah. Cards like Armadillo, Honest Rutstein have come up in conversation as like too good, but I think to Danelius's point about pushing the power of cards that uncommon, I think the power level is coming up to meet the cards that are quote unquote too good, rather than them actually being like straight up power outliers. There are still things like Hollow Marauder and things like that are such powerful engines, like value engines that put other people so far behind that we don't play them. But something like Armadillo, I'm okay with it existing in our cube. I also I like the art, and that usually sways me just enough to be like, let's keep it around, even though nobody can beat it. But yeah, that's monocolored cards. Okay, so the Glimmerlight Award. This goes to the best new colorless non-land card of the year, and the answer is obviously Bandit's Hall. So we're going to go ahead and just walk that one in and move on from there to the next one. which is okay. Well, it's I don't even want to do this, but my answer is Bandits Hall, which you guys know is correct and is way cooler of a card. Bandits Hall being the kind of like manolith that when you commit a crime, it gets a counter and you can pay 2 mana to remove one of those counters to draw a card. Just a very cool variation on a mana rock, even if it's not maybe the world's favorite colorless card of the year. It's certainly the coolest one.
Tim, I have a question because I was just looking at the Jank Diver cube list. Did you sneakily take out Glimmerlight? I noticed.
No, we never. It's been on the dock to talk about it. We never added it. I didn't mess with Glimmerlight at all. Okay, context for the listener. I brought this up a couple times because I'm sorry to spoil your guys' thunder here, but both of their answers is Glimmerlight for some reason. Glimmerlight is the 2 mana colorless equipment from Duskmourn that makes a 1/1 enchantment glimmer when it enters the battlefield, and then you can equip it for 1 mana, and it gives the equipped creature +1/+1. Easily the most controversial card from my standpoint of the year. I am not a Glimmerlight believer. I do not look at this card and see anything worth noting about. I did not even think it was as good as the rest of the world thought it was in Duskmourn, even though the data will not back me up on that, so I'm certainly wrong in that regard. But man, Glimmerlight, it's like a meme at this point that I'm like a Glimmerlight hater. And for cube purposes, I think it's like super mopey, but I know you guys disagree on that. I know you guys think it covers enough ground for a lot of different archetypes to be like a justifiable card. So if you guys want to speak to Glimmerlight, go for it.
You mean best card in the set, best card in the or best common in the set, Glimmerlight? Is that the card you're talking about, Tim?
Sure. Yeah, that's what the data says. Sure.
I think the thing that okay, so first of all, colorless cards these days in Peasant are awful. We just do not get good colorless cards very much.
This is true. Yeah.
There's like, it was for me. I don't play Bandits Hall, though I did like it a lot in OTJ. The only other colorless card I even added to my cube this year was Mobile Homestead, and I think the card's fine. It's nothing to write home about. I actually think Glimmerlight is legitimately very good, and I think that the thing that makes it so good in general, whether it's retail or not, is that 2 mana colorless plays that you actually actively kind of want to play on turn 2 let you keep more opening hands. That's the thing. That's it. That's the whole thing. And for that reason, they have to be careful with what they give to 2 mana colorless cards, because if you just get to always play with it and then keep more opening hands, I think the utility on this card is very high. The fact that you get 2 permanents for 1 card is something that I just very much appreciate. So I do think the card is very good. It's a card that in any aggro deck I'm very happy to play with in cube, specifically because again I get to keep all my openers with it. So I think it makes it more valuable than it might seem on its face. I agree that the full power output on the card is not particularly impressive, but yeah, it gets there for me.
Yeah, I mean, 2 mana for 2 game objects. It doesn't come up in our particular cube, but we actually put this in the Neo cube because it immediately enables the like white-black balance thing where you had to have an artifact and an enchantment in play, because the token it makes is an enchantment. So there's like little micro synergies there if you care about either card type. We mentioned earlier cards like Kinzen Smelter. This is a card you can play on turn 2, and then turn 3 you play your Smelter, you sack the Glimmerlight, and you ship with a 3/1. Like there's all kinds of little things you can do with Glimmerlight, and they don't necessarily manifest themselves in every cube, but I do think the card is legitimately very good. I think the like, if I'm gonna give credit to Tim, I think Bandits Hall is actually my favorite card of the year, despite the Glimmerlight meme status.
That's only if he's gonna give credit to me, though.
Bandits Hall is a slick draw engine. It's like probably the best 3 mana rock available, and the only good one I think that we would ever consider running at the moment. Just being able to convert your removal spells into more card draw, let you play an attrition game super well. But yeah, I don't know. I do legitimately love Glimmerlight. I took them very highly in Duskmourn, regardless of what the data said. I just thought the card was really good in the decks that I wanted to play it in, and I might be accused of putting it in decks that maybe it shouldn't have been put in, but the card was really good at letting you trade up, and I think again that's less valuable here in the Peasant cube, but I do think for your aggressive decks it is nice sometimes to get that little bit of extra stats and the extra bodies, especially considering the go wide nature of a lot of our decks and the just the various synergies going on. I think it's I just think it's a great card. It's a slick design.
It just lets you use your mana really efficiently, whether it's like on turn 2 and you don't have the right color to play your other cards, or just giving you access to that 1 mana equip. For the rest of the game, you can just move it around when you have the mana lying around. So none of that makes it, the total power output is not amazing, but I think it's a great little utility card.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a family and I'd like to see them at some point today. So let's put a bow on it. I could go into more details about why I don't like Glimmerlight, but catch me in the Jank Diver game in Discord and we can have that conversation there if you're not already part of the meme energy surrounding my unbelievable disdain of Glimmerlight or whatever the community's saying about it. I don't like the card. It's a great play. It's a great place to have opinions. All right, the Wheel in the Sky Award. I was like, land cycles, Journey, the Wheel in the Sky keeps on turning. I don't know. I struggled with this one. Anyway, the award goes to the best new land cycle or individual utility land of the year. I know somebody in here had the Duskmourn land cycle written at one point, but it looks like we all kind of unanimously agree the answer is the Modern Horizons 3 MDFCs, which is kind of cheating a little bit because they're actually just spells, but these cards were excellent. I mean, there's like 2 or 3 of the cycle that are kind of spells you're not super happy to have. Like the blue-white one comes to mind as like, I'm not really playing this for the tap down ability. I'm playing it to complete the cycle, but even that one, like sometimes you'll use it and just win the game. And then there's other ones that are like Stomp or Revitalize and Repast that are just real spells that you could play in a cube, but also just have MDFCs attached to them without upping the cost of the spell. And then there's other ones like what's the black-white one called?
Glasswing Grace, and that card is correct.
Yeah, that card just ends games sometimes. That's the 5 mana aura that gives +2/+2 lifelink and flying, and it's like this could have been a swamp in my deck, but instead I get to win the game with this card. And it doesn't do that every single time, but that and the green-white one that gives a creature +1/+1 for each enchantment and creature you control. Like being able to repurpose your mana base into things that actually add a bunch of power and toughness to the board or remove creatures or interact in different ways. We don't need to go on a full tirade about why MDFCs are so good, but I think this is just easily the best land cycle of the year, with some shout outs to things like the MH3 landscapes and the I don't know what the nickname is, but the Duskmourn lands, Unlucky lands, yeah, that's it. The ones that come in untapped if a player has 13 or less life. Those are good too, but the MDFCs are just wild.
Well, and you can also throw in not just the gold MDFCs, but also the monocolored MDFCs. Yeah, in general, the full set of MDFCs from MH3 has just totally changed Peasant. I think it's a different format almost because of those cards. And even the blue-white one that you're talking about, yeah, like the aesthetics there aren't as great because you can't do the energy thing, but just having access to a land that also counts as an instant or sorcery for decks that care about instants or sorceries, like that, and that comes out a lot for things like the creatures, like Witch Enchanter, where you have some payoff for having creatures in your graveyard, like Revenge of the Rats. So yeah, I think it's completely changed Peasant, and that's why I took out my answer of the unlucky lands, because I can't justify that as the answer here. It's obviously the MD.
Those are fine too, but
yeah, I mean, and if you're playing this is the question of would you be willing to have one tap land in your mono white deck if it meant that sometimes you're going to top deck it on turn 6 and win the game, right? And I think suppression rate is probably the most situational of them, but again, it is just oftentimes win the game when you play the card.
Well, one of the strange implications with this though is that we 1-for-1 swapped a land cycle for these, like the entire cycle, but they are hybrid spells as well. So like a red-black deck might just incidentally pick up Stomp because it's fairly free for them to play it, but also means the red-green deck now has somebody competing for one of its dual land slots. So we're still kind of feeling out how that all kind of pans out in the end, because it does mean certain 2-color decks, even if the 2-color pair isn't contested by anybody else, some of their mana fixing gets snatched up because of the nature of the MDFCs. But if you're not counting those sorts of implications and just pure power level, these MDFCs are great.
I think anything that encourages your drafters to take their Peasant mana fixing higher is a good thing. So I think
we would all agree on that.
Yeah, I noticed the other night that I passed a Glasswing Grace for an Essence Reliquary, and I'm almost positive. I'm 98% positive that if I were actually trying to spike, I should have just taken Glasswing Grace for multiple reasons. But you really notice that if you don't take a land now, there's not a lot of like there's not a lot of leeway, right? The landscapes give you a little bit of breathing room, but they only fix for one color. They don't fix for both. You know, mana fixing is going to be, you know, somebody's going to probably be doing something with like 3 to 4 colors, or probably 3. 4 colors isn't really doable in our Peasant Cube, I don't think, most of the time. But you really notice, so you're really prioritizing those mana fixing cards. And I think that's where cards like, especially if you're in a slower deck, cards like Bandit's Hall kind of come in as this ability to slot this into your deck to fix your mana, because it is actually fixing your mana. It's not just overkill like it might be in like the mainline Jank Diver Cube, where I think oftentimes a card like Bandit's Hall wouldn't be very good because you don't need it because your mana base is already so good.
Yeah, and Denise, I 100% agree from the cube designer perspective that I like to see my drafters have to use real picks on lands rather than just floating free land picks towards the end of a pack or whatever. But I'm sure you get this feedback as well. Maybe you don't, but from our drafters, like a lot of drafters do not agree with that. They just want to get all the lands that they can possibly play every single time.
Thankfully, I just never listen to my drafters, so I don't have that problem.
Oh, good. Okay. Maybe we should start doing that, Teld.
yeah, because like you do hear a good bit of feedback from our drafters of like, oh, I'm playing green red, but my green black opponent took a stump stomp or something like that, or the Mario draft. Yeah, somebody else took my Glasswing Grace. I didn't wheel it, and it's like, well, you can't expect.
But then when you go back and see the log, like they didn't take the 2-color landscape that they could have. Yep. Like, and it's like, well, I mean, is it because the fixin's not plentiful, or is it because you didn't responsibly take a land at this other point? Like stuff like that. So
yeah, I do want to shout out that I think at Peasant, I actually do think the 2 auras, the Strength of the Harvest and Glasswing Grace, are probably to me been the most impressive because they just so frequently end the game immediately. Like in a vacuum, I think Revitalizing, Repass, the green black one, and Stump Stomp are better. But man, those auras are so impressive when you actually watch them in a game.
And you get them kind of for free.
I was just going to say, I think Legion Leadership is normally not very good. I mean, like occasionally it being a combat trick is nice, but like I have also been combo killed by it. I think that's where it's really impressive is your opponent like goes, okay, Monstrous Rage, or they Strengthen the Harvest something, and then you're like, all right, I'll take the damage. They're like, all right, well, you're dead because I have Legion Leadership.
Yeah. I think we should take we should also just shout out Nesting Grounds here, right, from MH3 as like probably the best utility land if we were counting that as something separate from land cycles, and that one was downshifted from rare to uncommon in MH3 and was just like, wow, this is such a fun card to play with. Like, that's just not an effect you get a lot, right? Moving counters. Like, sometimes you'll get effects that move +1 counters between creatures, but just moving any counter from any permanent you control somewhere else just lets you do some really busted things with sagas in particular, but there's some other fun stuff you can do, like finality counters and stun counters and things like that. So I'm a big fan of Nesting Grounds. I always try to squeeze it into my decks, even if I have like 2 cards that it interacts with, and then you can do some really broken things with things like Evolution Witness, where you're moving +1 counters back and forth and stuff like that. Really good with Nadu, as it turns out as well.
I don't actually know if Nesting Grounds is very good, but it's the kind of card that's probably a forever card just because of the sweetness factor of it.
Yeah, you get that going with Welcome to Sweet Tooth, which is a pretty tame example, honestly, and it's just like, haha, like, I'm going to win this game. It's going to take 15 turns, but I'm going to win this game. The Bob the Builder Award goes to the sweetest build around of the year. A lot of this is going to be cards that have come up before. Insidious Roots. Insidious Roots is my pick, mostly because of a lot of the buzz surrounding it from our community and how like it went from, oh, this card is unbeatable, it's broken, needs to be banned, to, oh, there's actually ways to play around it, to, oh, if you just hate it out of the draft, nobody gets to play with it, like, and just a ton of support for it as well. There wasn't a good category here for a couple of these other cards, so I want to give just a really quick nod to Sneaky Snacker, which is the blue-black fairy that comes back from your graveyard when you draw your 3rd card each turn. We found that wasn't a really good fit for what our blue-black deck was doing, but acknowledge that it's a really cool card if it's supported with the right support pieces. And then I have to shout out Fear of Burning Alive as like my new pet card. That's the Delirium 6-drop that deals 4 to your opponent when it enters, and if you have Delirium, anytime you deal damage to your opponent directly, you also get to deal that much damage to one of their creatures. Just I'm in love with the Delirium stuff from Duskmourn, and Fear of Burning Alive is just such a sweet card. So my actual answer is Insidious Roots, but I wanted to shout out those other 2 cards because there's not really a good place to shout them out otherwise.
Yeah, so I have Essence Reliquary, which we've talked plenty about already, and that's probably the winner of the sweetest build around of the year. Mischievous Mystic I have in here, which is probably the winner for like the actual best build around of the year. Though I have a hard time even calling it a build around because it is just a good card, without building that much around it. But I think you are incentivized to try to build around it. And a third card that I think it's still up in the air for me a little bit is Revenge of the Rats. I did get to do the Revenge of the Rats Snarling Gorehound thing in a draft recently, and man, oh man, did that feel really busted. So I have hopes. I have high hopes for that effect, but it just hasn't been tried enough yet in my cube to have a strong feeling about it. But I think there could be something there.
It was very impressive the time I played against Fletcher in a draft, and he built a deck that really maximized that card with Neighborhood Guardian and he had some sort of way to entomb it into the graveyard. I don't remember what that was, and all sorts of the Snarling Gorehound thing as well. Like he was just popping off with Revenge of the Rat. So I have high hopes for that one moving forward.
Yeah, I'm gonna go out on a limb with that card and say that I do think it's the kind of card that'll create more memories than be particularly powerful, but it's the kind of card that we like because it creates like really memorable moments. But secondly, I think I'm going to double down on my thought that it's not really a green-black card. It's
really
a
Mardu card. You're totally right.
It's a Mardu card.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a Mardu card. Yep, I agree. I had not thought about it during our set review where you brought up the Mardu angle. I hadn't really thought about that much. And since then, yeah, I only want it in Mardu. I think it is it's way better as a Mardu card than as a Sultai card for sure. But yeah, very good point that you made in that set review. It's almost like you know what you're talking about.
They keep me around because I occasionally have it.
Yeah, we wax and wane a little bit, but every time we get to like the bottom of the trough, he says something that's like, oh, God, all right, we'll keep him on for we'll sign him for another 6 months. The Ambrosia Award to the most flavorful card, or potentially best art, just overall good aesthetically pleasing card of the year. Mine's gonna go to, I didn't look through like every single card of the year, but the one that came to mind was Head of the Homestead, which is the Selesnya rabbit card from Bloomburrow. And there's something about the little baby rabbits holding like knives and pitchforks that like appeals to my sensibilities. It also, I mean, we could just say Bloomburrow as a whole. The entire aesthetic of that set was just amazing. Even if you're not like a old school red wall head or something like that, like it's just really easy to love the art from Bloomburrow. So that's my pick, though. I did want to shout out a rare. I'm sorry, I'm going to bring up a rare.
Blasphemy.
I know, Balustrade Worm from Duskmorn. I just really like the way this art was, the composition of this art. I'm not like an art major or anything, but the way that you look at this card and see like, oh, here's a banister, here's a big worm in the background, and then you realize that the worm is actually like the balustrade itself is part of the worm. It just reminded me of like old school Castlevania bosses and stuff like that, and big mansions where like the walls are alive. So I really love that art. But as far as a peasant pick goes, Head of the Homestead, just nice homely feeling to that card.
Yeah, I think that I'm gonna have a bit of a hot take in that I actually think that Bloomburrow aesthetically for me was a pretty big miss. It's not what I was hoping for. I was hoping for it to be more of a red wall, like a little bit darker, like factions at war with each other kind of a thing, and it ended up being more of like a Fern Gully kind of vibe to me, which is not really what I was hoping for. I know everybody loved it, and so I'm not trying to yuck anyone's yum there, but I did really like the aesthetic on Heartfire Hero and Shoreline Looter because those to me were a little bit more of kind of the more serious aesthetic that I was hoping for from Bloomburrow. So those are my two winners for the year. I do, however, want to call out Duskmorn as a whole. I know a lot of people really had a lot of distaste for a lot of what was going on in that set from an aesthetics perspective, and I certainly could have done without Acrobatic Cheerleader or whatever. But cards like Arabella, I do think were really well done, and it was cool that they were able to give a horror feel to the set that really felt so different than Innistrad. So yeah, I definitely appreciated a lot from that set, but I think Heartfire Hero specifically, that card just looks so cool and epic and reminds me of my childhood with Red Wallet. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, helps that it plays out that way too.
Yeah, I also really like Heartfire Hero. I think for me, Duskmorn ended up being for me a very polarizing set. We say that a lot in our main cube episode, but like the art in that set, I either landed on really loving it, stuff like a lot of the fears, but especially like Fear of Isolation, Fear of Burning Alive, the like Osea Stick Twister, and the the stuff that were showing the creepy monstery side of the house, as opposed to like the slashers or dudes in hallways side of the set, those really ended up hitting with me very well. I think part of it is probably now there's some nostalgia for it because it was such a just ridiculously good limited set. So, a lot of these cards that I was a little on the fence about, I ended up really enjoying. That being said, I have a couple I wanted to talk about. So my honorable mentions, I think, are going to go to a couple of OTJ cards. I know that I'm probably in the extreme minority of people who just loved the spaghetti western hammy. Like, I personally am still all in on OTJ being one of my favorite sets from a design perspective. Just, I love the look of it. But two cards that really stick out to me are Ruthless Lawbringer and Honest Rutstein. I think they capture a slightly more serious side of this thing, as opposed to stuff like This Town Ain't Big Enough, which I do like, but cards like that and Lasso by the Law are a little into the full-blown like all ham, no bread, whereas I like Ruthless Lawbringer. I just think the sort of like what it'd be like Clint Eastwood type of like lone cowboy, doing whatever it takes to get the bad guy. I really like that vibe. And Honest Rutstein just was one of the first arts we saw, and it gave me big Bloodborne vibes for some reason. It just felt like big Bloodborne energy, and I've just always loved Rutstein's art in this card. I especially didn't like the original Rutstein. I think that art is really lame. So Honest Rutstein being so cool was a big one for me. And then I also want to shout out one that's a little more weird, but I really liked Glimpse the Impossible. It's a very different style of art. It's not cute. It's not cowboys or anything. It's just weird. It's very colorful. And I don't know, it just vibed with me. It was one that stuck out to me. I always try to mention in every set review a couple of pieces of art that I like. A lot of times I'll mention a card just because I like the art. So you can just go back and listen to our set reviews if you want to hear my opinions on the art and design in cards. I think as Magic goes forward, I feel like it's a lot more polarizing every set for me, though. It's either a big hit or a big miss for me. And maybe that's a good thing, right? Like, maybe it's a good thing that there's a lot of different art styles that will, that'll try, to appeal to different people, as opposed to just sort of being there. There's a lot of art that is just kind of there. So I like when these arts will really stick out, whether it's something awful. Like, I think as time has gone on, the Faithless Looting art is like the big meme in the community, but like, we remember it. It's a very memorable piece of art whether you like it or not.
Yeah, Glimpse the Impossible is a nice one too. It's got the moment that like Gisela, I think it's Gisela, like turning into Brizella, melding with Bruna and stuff like that. So cool little callback as well.
Oh, huh.
Yeah,
that's
I don't know. I think there's flavor text on the card. I don't remember, but it's Gisela being like tainted by Emrakul's influence. Which is it's cool. It's cool to when they do the MH3 like callbacks and stuff like that. But yeah, again, not an art major, but we should have done worst art. We should have had a worst art category because I'm sure I could find way more worst art.
Just give me any random digital piece of art. It is probably
where's that museum?
The Museum Mortars. Yeah.
The Museum Mortars from... anyway, let's go ahead and move on. We've got the Emergent Archetype Award. This one should be pretty straightforward. This is for a new front-runner archetype or a mini archetype that's proven its worth and probably demands your attention moving forward. My answer, two pretty quick hits. The Valiant-style Tricks deck, which is really, really held together by Heartfire Hero, but at this point, with the Pioneer Masters and the downshift of like Annex and Cymede and a lot of the other heroic cards, I bet you could just have like a functional red-white heroic deck, if not like a Naya Spectrum heroic deck with some of the really pushed combat tricks lately and some of the actual straight-up Valiant/heroic creatures. And then I wanted to shout out Delirium as well, because this is what I want to be doing in the Peasant Cube these days. I want to play with Patchwork Beastie and Fear of Burning Alive and Wickerfolk, whatever it's called, the green-red Wickerfolk guy. So I enjoy those, but I'm not going to claim that's the best archetype. I do think the combat trick-style heroic Valiant deck is a real deck. And I think if you really wanted to support it, the pieces are there for it, though. I don't know that we're going to go all in on like red, white, heroic or anything like that. But I did. Heartfire Hero is just a sweet card. Like Heartfire Hero is really just holding like it's Atlas. It's holding the entire red section on its back right now. So
I think Heartfire Hero is a perfect example of when we talk about like we're perfectly fine with them burning down constructed formats if they give us good cube cards. And Heartfire Hero might be the poster child for that, where I don't think it's quite as dominant as it was, but it was running the tables on multiple constructed formats and just like making them miserable to play against. But like in cube, it's sweet. It's awesome.
If it was like a human warrior instead of a mouse warrior or whatever, it would not hit the same.
No, absolutely not.
It's the fact that it's a mouse that it's just like, yeah, this card's great. Love it.
Yeah, totally agree on tricks. I really enjoyed the tricks decks, and one card I'd shout out there in addition to Heartfire Hero that I see a lot of people not playing is Cacophony Scamp from Phyrexia All Will Be One.
Yeah,
it's the 1/1 that when you deal combat damage with it, you can sacrifice it to proliferate, and when it dies, it deals damage to any target equal to its power. And I can't tell you the number of games that I've seen end with somebody just Tyvar standing or a similar X fireball, plus X spell on Cacophony Scamp, dealing damage. And then it sacrifices itself, dealing its power. It just combos off essentially to kill the player. So I think it's another really good card alongside Heartfire Hero in those decks. But so for me, I had Abzan Food is one standout for me this year. I really pushed into the green-black food space. I'm trying to write an article about it here pretty soon, so I think it's a very cool way to take green-black in your cube that's different from kind of the Insidious Roots graveyard theming that green-black kind of has always been about, I feel like, in the peasant space and often is about in the retail space. Food just gives it a different angle that I think is really interesting. But also we have multiple white food cards now that are good. Obviously Rosie, but Carrot Cake, Cat Collector now. So yeah, I really like the Abs and Food stuff. I threw white non-creature recursion on here because I do think there is kind of a deck that is just about white non-creature spells all kind of thrown together. So Essence Reliquary, Builder's Talent, Michiko's Reign of Truth, Sunblessed Healer, just kind of tossing a lot of this stuff in the same deck, I think works quite well. But for me, easily the number one choice for the year is the blue draw 2 kind of archetype that I've been talking about with Emrakul's Messenger and Mystic, and then also often going to be paired with black for some of the blue, black, gold cards and Mindless Conscription. But you can also pair it with red. Red has a lot of looters or rummagers that it works quite well with. And the main reason for me why it's number one is just that, again, blue just needed it so bad for me. It just needed something to do that wasn't Instance and Sorcery Matters or, counter spells and what else, like unclear. So yeah, really happy that this archetype kind of emerged over the course of the year to kind of give blue something to do.
Yeah, so I went with one that, I guess it technically existed before this year, but really just, I was mentioning, my favorite card being, of course, Skyfisher, and I think oftentimes in the past that card was more of an aggressive card, where you were, you were picking stuff up, but you were mostly putting a 2/3 flyer into play, and you were trying to get some extra value along the way. And we've seen a couple of times this year people playing these very controlling decks, or very, value pile decks with Score Skyfisher, and one that really stuck out to me was Doug played a Boros deck that, if you just look at the list, kind of looked like an aggressive deck, but it was playing just a pile of removal and had Coruscation Mage and Bandit's Hall, and it was using the Skyfishers to pick up cases and to pick up all these little value dorkers with Shepherd of the Cosmos and stuff. And it was just this super grindy card pile that basically just put people into the ground off removal, as opposed to just, it was a very weird Boros just control deck, essentially. So these sort of core Skyfisher value piles, I think it's somewhere in the Mardu spectrum probably is the most common way to play this, but it's just, you're basically just, picking up your removal spells, you're picking up your value cards, you're looping and you're just putting people into the ground with white cards, which is a little out of the ordinary since those cards tend to be very aggressive at Peasant.
Mm-hmm. Starting to think it might have been a mistake to give Teld a platform with a bunch of different awards where you could just talk about Skyfisher and every single one of them. Just fits the description of every single award here. I did want to ask Danelius, is there a place that people can read that write-up you did on the green-black food spectrum? I'm
working on it. I have some ideas, and I've got some I've got some places, but I need to decide how much I want to make that a thing in 2025 of trying to get work published. So yeah, more to come on that. I'm not sure yet.
Okay. Let's move on. I think we've got 6 categories left. Peasant Peak and Peasant Week awards go to the best and worst limited retail contributors for the Peasant environment. I mean, MH3. MH3 is best. I'll let you guys speak more to that if you want, but I think my worst, I think it's going to be Pioneer Masters for me, which is a little bit of a cop-out because it doesn't affect everybody, but I was excited to finally get this, and then having combed through the set like time and time again, even with the rarity downshifts, it turns out there's just not much going on. I think we added like 5 or 6 cards from Pioneer Masters to our queue, and some of those are like Boon Satyr type cards where me and Teld are like, there's no way this card's actually that good, but like we like it and we want to play it. So there's stuff like that. I think Pioneer Masters just came too late, unfortunately. But if you want a non like digital arena answer, probably MKM. A lot of the mechanics being things like morph related stuff, you know, Suspect, which is just complete throwaway. There's like 1 or 2 good cases that are worth talking about, but for the most part, they're kind of dorky. So, yeah, MH3 best, MKM kind of coming up on the rear. Though MKM's a fine set just for Peasant contribution. Not too much going on there outside of the white aggro stuff.
Yeah, so I have a 540 cube and something like a 10th of the cube now is MH3, so I don't see how the answer can be anything but MH3 for
it's
set of the year.
MH3, yeah.
But you know, I will say that it's so good that it's almost a bummer because you know it's just set the standard kind of ridiculously high across lots of different colors and types of cards, and you know, I'm happy. I do want there to be a powerful, or I like there being really powerful cards in the cube. It's just, but yeah, it's going to be hard to replace some of these effects ever. But I agree with you about MKM. Foundations actually probably is the actual worst set of the year, just because there's almost no cards from that set that I added to my cube.
Oh, so. How did I forget? I hate Foundations.
But
I don't know how I forgot Foundations. I think that set's poopy, stupid, poo-poo.
Also, I just checked. There are more cards from MKM in our cube than there are Foundations cards, despite there being 4,000.
Yeah.
Now, granted, that doesn't count like the jumpstart and all that sort of thing. It's hard to actually look for Foundations because it's broken up into like 7 different products.
Well, it's not exactly fair to hold Foundations to the same standard as other sets just because it's not trying to be, you know, a normal set, but you know, that who cares? Like from this perspective, it is not a very good Peasant set. So.
I hold it against it wholeheartedly.
Yeah, obviously Bloomburrow's peak, you know, Bloomburrow peak, Bloomburrow peak. No, it's MH3, right? Like MH3 is just like, oh yeah, what a wild set that was. I mean, and I'm actually looking, there are, 54 cards in our 360 are MH3 cards.
Jesus.
I think I'm like 54 also for my 540, but yeah, it's yeah. And it's, again, so many of these cards you're never going to replace because they're like lands that are so good, or stuff like Marionette Apprentice or Glyph Elemental.
Yeah, that's like, the card that came to mind is like, Marionette Apprentice, they're not gonna print a better version of a Blood Artist like that in a mainline set? Like, that's just Galvanic Discharge, like, just get your instant speed strangle, right? Like, either fields out stuff that already existed or probably is going to field out things that are coming in the future.
The wild thing is there's a bunch of cards that are really powerful and sweet from MH3 that we just haven't even talked about. Stuff like Molten Gatekeeper are just like random awesome cards that
it's a good card.
You know, just haven't even talked about it. But yeah, Foundation, stinky poo-poo, awful set. Gave us Mischievous Mystic and like...
I hate Foundation so much. Oh.
Yeah, the main set especially has like, I think... four cards in it that really matter, and then when you get into the jumpstart stuff, you get stuff like Satina and Inept and all that are a little more interesting, maybe. But yeah, just a stinker of a set
for cube. Also for
retail.
Every other facet of Magic.
Yeah.
All right, the Swan Song Award. So I made this one up. It's an award presented to a classic Magic the Gathering card, a classic cube card that we don't expect to make it through the next year. I'm coming up on Blood Artist as a card that is not a necessity for cube anymore, and part of that is the existence of Marionette Apprentice, which is sad to say, but like, if all the Blood Artist effects are going to have good stat lines, I don't see how Blood Artist like really makes it another year. And I still don't, even to this day, I think Blood Artist is like a cuttable card that we would get flack for cutting because of its classic nature, but I have no problem cutting classics. I do not have that like, oh, this is a classic card, we can't cut. Like, I have no affiliation with that sort of stuff at all. So, like, if a card just isn't cutting it, I am perfectly fine cutting it. I don't particularly care if people find it to be, like, a defining card of the cube or anything like that. But I think Blood Artist just being a 0-1, like, yeah, the effect is really good, but there's so many comparable Blood Artist cards, and we just got probably the best one of all time as a 2-drop. Like, I think Blood Artist is on its way out next year.
I'm also not a Blood Artist believer. I got told we are crazy for not thinking that Blood Artist is like, I mentioned that I don't even think it's a particularly good card, and I got basically implied that it's like first pickable by some people, was the feeling I got. I don't know if they didn't actually say that, but like they were talking about it like a first pickable card, like just incredible in-game engine. And I don't know, like I'm just not believing in Blood Artist anymore. It does. I did get to watch it like kind of pop off in a game. It did kill me. It'll kill you sometimes, like if you have a really big board, but when you play, I don't know, it's just such an anemic card when you've got other cards that do so much.
Memorable, not good. It's just one of those, and there was a time where it was better when opponents weren't curving out 1, 2, 3, 4 on you often, but that's what's happening. At least in my cube, that's what's happening, and I can't afford to play a 2-mana 0/1. That's just like asking to die. So,
do you already not play Blood Artist?
I don't play Blood. No, and I think it's quite bad. Yeah, I think it's pretty bad these days. I mean, it depends on the cube. I think there are cubes where I imagine it performing well, like again, where aggro is toned down a little bit, maybe removal's toned down a little bit. I could imagine it being better, but it's just not the kind of effect. I mean, Ellis Ilcor I like a lot, and that's, I think, a much better version, just because it's a 2/2, and obviously Marionette Apprentice, but yeah, I'm not a big fan of Blood Artist myself. But for me, I force rotate, so I don't know, the oldest cards in my cube are 8 years old, and there's not that many. So I will automatically be rotating out On-Crop Crasher this year, and a few others. I think the card I put on the list, I don't even remember. Hidden Stockpile I put on the list, but that's about to rotate out, so this, doesn't quite apply to my
so you're in like an extended situation where you just basically give it a time limit and then you force it out. Okay.
Yeah, and I do that partially because I think that's kind of the nature of Magic these days anyways. We just get so much better cards in modern sets than existed in the past. And the nice thing about the kind of forced rotation is you avoid situations like Blood Artist, where there's some people who want you to hold on to these quote-unquote classic or nostalgic cards. For me, that's not the reason why I made my cube. It wasn't to be super nostalgic. It was more to like highlight really good limited cards of the past few years in this time frame of the golden age of limited, which I really think that we're in. So I don't feel the need to include the nostalgic cards, and then having the forced rotation just kind of, it preempts that question of like, well, why don't you play this Peasant card that I really like from 15 years ago? And it's like, well, probably because it's not good enough, and then also because I forced rotate. So
yeah, so speaking of On-Crop Crasher, I'm actually putting it on my list as one, and I don't have any particular reason to believe this, because usually when On-Crop Crasher comes down, it's pretty good, but couple of things. Firstly, 2 toughness on a 3-drop is really sketchy. Secondly, there's more cards than ever that are producing 1/1 tokens that will make this ability much worse. Exert is a mechanic that I feel like is too low power for modern designs. I feel like I kind of get the vibe that we might just call it a hunch. We're just going to get a card that's better than this year. That just does something similar but better. It just strikes me as a card that is historically been good, but as I see the direction the cube is moving, I just think we're going to get something better. I'm never taking a bet against Sifterworm ever. I will never. I just wanted to shout out that card as like somehow it's still here. it's chugging along.
We even got Polaka Worm this year, and it's like Sifter Worm might be better than Polaka Worm.
I think it is.
Sifter Worm is the little guy, the little worm that could, it just keeps holding on despite power creep. I'm sure one day we'll have to let it go, but until they show me the card, I'm not taking bets against it.
Yeah, On-Crop Crasher is a good call. That's been in the cube since we started it, and I could see them just printing. It'd be pretty wild, but I could see them just printing On-Crop Crasher that doesn't have Exert. Like a territorial Hammer Skull with haste, right? Maybe make it a Boros card or something like that, but I could see it happening.
Crasher's just really good at punishing people who are not obeying the rules. If they're like, I don't have my 2-drop, and then they go, okay, well, then I'll haste my 3, and then when you finally play your 3 that you think is going to stabilize, then I'll Exert.
Yeah.
But if people are following,
you get that first hit in for free.
Yeah, if people are playing by the rules, I agree. It's definitely gotten worse.
Okay, Old Yeller Award, the card that we have to take out back and send out to pasture. So basically a card that we were playing towards the beginning of the year, a card that we like, that we had to quote-unquote put down because something replaced it or it's just not up to snuff. My answer was kind of a little bit of a cop-out, is Binding the Old Gods, which is just a really fun removal spell to play with. That's the black-green saga that destroys something on ETB and then fetches a forest and then doesn't have a third chapter, even though there's text written on the card. We actually replaced this because we got buried in the garden in MKM, and it felt a little like cheesy to keep using up all these gold slots on 4 mana removal spells plus ramp. Like, it's essentially the same kind of concept, and we felt that was a better fit for the green-white section than this was for green-black. So we didn't have to cut this, but it was a little sad to let go of binding the old cards. Could easily see it coming back at some point. It's not necessarily power crept out of existence so much as like there's a lot of other redundancy across that sort of effect in other color pairs.
My gold sections, I try to make sure that I have pretty large gold sections compared to a lot of the other Peasant Cubes, and I kind of intentionally make sure that one of my gold cards in each section is a removal spell, and I think Binding the Guild Gods is definitely still good enough from that perspective. But yeah, I can understand. It's on the edge.
You had the best answer for this.
Yeah, it's got to be Charging Monster Store just because Quake Tuskboar got printed. But I will say that it's not clear to me whether Quake Tuskboar is actually better or not. I do think that the double red isn't nothing. If you're playing a green red Stompy deck, the fact that some small percentage of the time you can't cast your Quick Tuskboar and you could have cast your Monster Swords, like that does matter, and I just don't know how much the reach matters. So I don't think that this is settled, but if Quick Tuskboar is better than Monster Sword, then that's sad because it just kind of gets pushed out by this very slightly better card that maybe isn't as aesthetically pleasing as Monster Sword is. So so I don't know. I'm not 100% yet on that change, but that would be my answer.
It's funny because we talked about Charging Monster, so we replaced it with Quake Tuskboar, and then we got Dragon Trainer, and we wanted to try something different in the slot. And I can tell you, if we had Charging Monster Sword there, I think I would have fought harder for it, but I had no emotional attachment to Quake Tuskboar. I think that card just I agree with you. I don't actually think your Charging Monster Sword needs reach. I'm starting to think that it's probably debatable whether second red mana is worth gaining reach. It's just easier to cast the Monster Sword. My award went to Mana War because it's just such an old card that we had around for so long, and then this year we got the bounce spell,
the best Mana War of all time.
Yeah, Unnerving Grasp, and it just. I do think Charging Monster Sword is probably the best answer just because of how unceremonious it was to get removed. It got replaced by a card that is only technically better. It's not even a card that is meaningfully better, whereas Unnerving Grasp is meaningfully better than Mana War. It's a lot better. And so I think the Charging Monster Sword is the best answer in terms of this is just a disappointing one. This is I don't want why did you do it this way? Could you not have given it I don't know, Midas or something to make it feels bad?
Unceremonious is the right word to describe it. It just didn't feel right as it was happening. It's ugh. And it's not even that Charging Monster Sword is an amazing card in the first place. It's I think it's good enough. Yeah. It's not amazing, but it's just it's just a cool card.
It's funny because I see Quake Tuskboar in play sometimes. I'm it's not that good.
No,
and then I was but I would totally defend Charging Monster Sword in the same exact spot.
Right.
So those are some sad ones to let go of. But there's probably a conversation there to Boar versus Monster Sword. I am of the opinion that Quake Tuskboar is just a better card, but
it's probably
don't really need to hash out the details there. It's very minor. My favorite award of the year, the Chains of Mephistopheles Award. This goes to a cubable card with a confusing or unnecessarily wordy text box. And if you've never seen the card Chains of Mephistopheles and you know how to spell that, I suggest looking it up. Because Jesus Christ. My answer is a Killer Among Us, and we've mentioned the card, but I will actually read the card this time since it's relevant to the award. A Killer Among Us is 4 and a green for an enchantment, and it reads, whenever a Killer Among Us enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white human creature token, a 1/1 blue merfolk creature token, and a 1/1 red goblin creature token, then secretly choose human, merfolk, or goblin. Sacrifice a Killer Among Us, reveal the chosen creature type. If target attacking creature token is the chosen type, put 3+1/+1 counters on it, and it gains Death Touch until end of turn. So my experience playing this card at the MKM pre-release is you don't just have the tokens on hand. So I had to use a mountain, an island, and a plain from a nearby box, secretly name a card, which the way I did that was I grabbed another basic land to correspond to the creature type I was choosing and just put it face down and revealed that basic the plains was a human. But then there's all these other little things This can only target an attacking creature. This can only target a creature token. The creature gains Death Touch, which people I don't think caught on to right away. It can target other tokens of these creature types that you already had in play from other cards, which does not come up very often, but sometimes does. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it reads really loosely, but this is the type of Chains of Mephistopheles card that I love because the story of the card is fantastic and the gameplay is awesome. And it's kind of like one of those burn down paper magic things, which I wouldn't do in a heartbeat, but playing this card on digitally works perfectly. This just works perfectly digitally. It's just a problem for paper magic. So I love this card. I think it's really powerful. I think it's really cool. And I like the idea. Like the flavor of it is perfect. Everything about it, even like the Death Touch here as a way to be like, oh, that's the killer. I think it's super, super cool. So I also like the art. It's just super dorky too. So everything about this card is cool, but wow, is it just like a handful to get your head around the first time you play with it.
So you said it doesn't come up that much, that it can hit other creature tokens, but you know, a nice curve in my cube is turn 4 Chimney Rapple into turn 5 a Killer Among Us. You just get the counters. With
but
haste.
do you name Goblin?
Yeah, you just name Goblin. You just name Goblin. Yeah.
Yeah, obviously you name Goblin. Yeah, I've had it come up with a Welcome to Sweet Tooth with the human token as well.
I think for me, a big level up moment with the card, at least in retail limited, was like I saw a bunch of people trying to get trick cutes with it. They would like attack with their 1 token, and you knew it was the thing. What I learned with the card was you play it, and then you just swing with all 3, and you make your opponent decide what it is, and then it's like whatever. When they just got whatever. Like it just worked out so much better for me to just play this card and just flunge.
Yes.
Okay. Well, so for me, I was gonna say I don't like your pick purely because I can tell you what that card does, and I still cannot tell you what Ral and the Implicit Maze does, and I challenge either of you to tell me without reading the card what the card actually does.
I'm not looking at it, but I think I'm gonna screw something up. Okay, 3 red for a saga, chapter 1. Ral in the Implicit Maze deals 2 damage to each creature you don't control, or each creature target opponent controls.
Wrong. 2
creature
damage
and
to each creature and Planeswalker. Very important.
Okay.
We don't run Planeswalkers in our cube, so no, it's not surprising you forgot that.
Chapter 2, exile the top 2 cards of your library.
You didn't pay the cost. Sorry, you lose.
You gotta pay the cost.
Oh, there's discard a card. Okay, well, you got me. There's a lot of knobs on here.
So you discard a card, and then you bottle 2 cards. Very important. It's that you exile until the end of your next turn for some reason, as opposed to this turn, even though you have all your mana available. I don't know why? And then,
well, it's that actually makes sense because it's supposed to store up spells for the spell.
Oh, right. So yes, and then chapter 3 is you get a Spell Gorger Weird token that importantly it has a mana value. Cost. Yes, very important. It has a mana value. Yeah. Insane.
Right, that
insane
might actually win because that card I actually hadn't considered just how ridiculous the lines of text on that card are.
Yeah, you got me. I was like, I've got this, and it's like, nope. There's extra.
It's impossible. It's actually impossible. Yeah.
All right, so mine is not. I think both of yours would be my actual choices. Mine is more of a personal gripe. And that is, mine is Propagator Drone. And so that's the Modern Horizons 3 card that's 1 and a green for a 2/2. It has Devoid, so it has no color. Creature tokens you control have evolve, and you can pay 3 and a green to make a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn creature token that has sacrifice this and add a colorless. It's not actually a complicated card, but on this card, on the evolve, there is a paragraph of text that tells you what evolve does, how it does it. And there was a big discussion about this card of if it triggers all your creature tokens when it enters play. And what we didn't notice is that if you read the full paragraph, the last line says they see this creature enter. So your Propagator Drone will trigger all of your tokens that are smaller than 2 power or toughness and give them a +1 counter. But like we had this big discussion about it, and then we realized it's in the reminder text, and it just like I don't know why that just stuck with me as something that made me mad for the year.
No, that's why they put the reminder text in, but they didn't feel like they could just say they see this creature enter, so they had to then put in the other like 4 lines of text, even though nowhere else in the set are they explaining what evolve does, they didn't really take that kind of care with other cards in the set, even though they use tons of different mechanics. So yeah, I agree, it's a wild choice that they made.
Yeah. If it just said creature tokens you control have evolve, parenthesis, they see this creature enter, that would have been, I would have no problem with this card.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
Yeah, that whole paragraph of reminder text in a master set was just like, what are we doing?
You know what that reminds me of is the old Hideaway cards. Because Hideaway, the reminder text for Hideaway used to say this permanent enters the battlefield tapped, but it was in the reminder text
Right, yep.
instead of like an effect of the card. So when they printed that, what do you guys know that 2-mana hideaway 2/1 creature that like?
Oh yeah.
When it leaves the battlefield,
Watcher
you get it
tomorrow
like,
or something.
Watcher for tomorrow, Watcher of tomorrow. Like that creature enters the battlefield tapped, but it's in the reminder text of Hideaway that it enters the battlefield tapped, which I think they've changed. To be fair, I think they've removed the ATV part and put it elsewhere. But that's really the propagator drone thing was funny because I remember us talking about it on the podcast and then being like, "Oh, did you finish reading the reminder text?"
I think in general,
it's right
when
there.
the reminder text on a card is longer than the non-reminder text, what's the point in use? I don't quite understand. It's like, okay, well, this is an italics, see, so it's not that intrusive. But the same thing for Round the Implicit Maze. They give you this Spellgorger weird token, and it's like, don't worry, we're going to remind you what this does by just listing out the full text of the card in the reminder text. It's like, I don't quite understand.
The funny thing too is like that technically with reminder text you could print the card without the reminder text, right? That's the whole point of reminder text. Right. So like, would a future rendition of this card just not have that text in there at all? And then
you just get a Spellgorger weird token. Don't worry about it. It's just
why does it have a mana cost? We've made. I don't understand why it has a mana cost. They've made token copies of creatures.
Well, I think they made that change in maybe it was even in MH3, where if you make a token copy of an actual card as opposed to just a token, then it does now have the mana cost. It's just weird. It's just weird that they felt the need to spell that out here, and they probably only did because of the rule change. But they just didn't have to do that part. I don't know. The entire choice.
Also, you could have just made a 2/2 token.
Exactly.
Like it didn't have to be a Spellgorger.
Exactly. It could have just been a 2/2 token that says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on this. They could have just done that, but like no. It needs to be the actual
it's not like
card.
Spellgorger weird is Rouse Eric's like pet creature or something. Like it's not that important.
I don't get it.
Okay, well, Chains of Mephistopheles Award's always fun. But just for the record, we gave this to Nadu for the mainline cube because of that really stupid triggers twice each turn text. The Adult Gold Dragon Award is kind of the opposite. So this goes to a cubable card that's just easy to understand. You just read the card and it's simple and it's like, wait a second, this is a playable Magic the Gathering card and I know what it does the first time I read it. I think we all came up with a couple answers here, but Fell, 1 in a black, sorcery, destroy target creature. Easy. Mwah, love it. And then Elvish Regrower. The Adult Gold Dragon Award is somewhat synonymous with Borin cards to some degree, and Elvish Regrower might be the most Borin Magic the Gathering card ever created, but that's the 4-mana 4/3 when it enters, get a permanent back from your graveyard to your hand, which we talked about in the Foundations review is like probably better than other Eternal Witness variants that we've had, but like so unexciting of a design. From our perspective, from my perspective especially, but yeah, Adult Gold Dragon for me goes to Elvish Regrower.
Both of yours answers were better than mine, so I won't even say mine. I won't even give it the time in the sun. So yeah, I agree. Elvish Regrower I think is the correct choice here, but go for it. Teld.
Yeah, so I have a pair of blue 2-drops. There are 2 cards I really liked. I know Danelius is high on one of them at least. So Mischievous Mystic I think is going to be my number 1. This is going to be my actual pick because it's very simple to understand. It's a dude, it flies, and if you manage to draw a second card, you get a 1/1. Easy peasy, understand. It has cool synergies. You'll be thinking about it a bunch, but the actual card itself is just so easy to understand. And then my other one is Plumecreed Escort, which is one of my favorite cards of the year. So that's the 1 in a blue for a flash flying. When it enters, target creature you control gains hexproof till end of turn. So it is a protection spell, stapled to a 2/1 flyer. Easy to understand, great card. We play it both cubes.
Yeah, Mystic actually came up as a Adult Gold Dragon for the mainline cube as well. Which, I mean, we don't really need to detail anything here. This is not about the power of the card so much as like, it is nice in Magic in the wordiness of the world where you get cards that are still easy to grok and play and are good.
Oh yeah, I kind of forgot we play both of those cards in both cubes. I forgot we play play both of them. Yeah.
Final category, and then we've got some wish list stuff to talk about, but is it called Underneath the Skin?
I'm confused. Maybe it is beneath. My bad. I don't know. No, it's not beneath the skin. What is it? Under?
Is it under?
Oh, it's just under the skin.
Is it under the skin?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, spoiler alert. This is the Card of the Year award. Literally just the best new card of 2024. And I don't know about you guys, but I kind of struggled with this one. Like, I went through a bunch of the other categories, and I was like, Hollow Marauder doesn't feel like the best card of the year. Heartfire Mentor could be, like, I could mention a lot of things that are already mentioned, but I wanted to use this slot really to highlight a card we haven't talked about in depth yet. And I think we really need to, like, go into depth a little bit about Under the Skin. And how just amazing this card is. So Under the Skin from Duskmourn is 2 and a green for a sorcery. You manifest Dread. So you look at the top 2 cards of your library, you put one face down as a 2/2. If it's a creature, you can flip it up for its mana cost. The other card goes to the graveyard, and then you get to get a permanent from your graveyard back to your hand. And I would venture to say this is just the best Eternal Witness of all time. Probably just better than actual Eternal Witness would be my guess, but Eternal Witness can actually pick up non-creature spells, so non-permanents. Maybe Ewit's still better, but the fact that you can fire this card off with an empty graveyard and still get a permanent back is amazing. Like, you can't run an Eternal Witness out on turn 3, but you can run this out and you're almost always going to get a permanent. The fact that it puts a card in your graveyard is amazing. Manifest Dread being like an all-star mechanic, like a very gluey mechanic for a lot of different stuff. The fact that sometimes you manifest a creature and you can actually turn it up into something better than a 2/2 is amazing. And the art on this card is fantastic too. So it just hits like every single knob that I want in like a grindy kind of mid-rangey card, to the point where we had gotten Evolution Witness in MH3, and then just immediately set after set, they're like, here's Elvish Regrower, here's Under the Skin, here's like every good Gravedigger you could ever want. Like, they've really pushed these effects, and I think Under the Skin is an absolute standout. And as a parallel to that, without going too much detail, the Manifest Dread bounce spell that you mentioned for the Mana War, also just fantastic. Unnerving Grasp, just absolutely fantastic. Like, repurposing these kind of classic cards as spells with Manifest Dread on them have proven to be like just really, really powerful. And I'm in love with Under the Skin. I think everything about the card is fantastic.
Yeah, I should have brought this one up as an example of like Duskmourn vibes art being at times, I think, really successful. I think this card really does kind of scream Magic. Like, you see this and it's like, yeah, this is a Magic card, as opposed to, Acrobatic Cheerleader or whatever. But yeah. And I totally agree. I love this card. One of the things that you didn't mention about it, it's not just that it has this alternate mode of just playing this on turn 3 when you have nothing in your graveyard, and it's just kind of 3 mana for a 2/2 and draw a card, which, that is the big downside of these return effects, is that most of the time they're bad opening hand cards. Like, from like a 17 lands data perspective, almost all of them, even Elvish Regrower in Foundations, not a good opening hand card, because generally speaking, to get the value from them, you need to have your graveyard building up. But they're insane top decks. They're just fantastic cards to draw off the top. Under the Skin, as a 3 mana 2/2 draw card, is just a very good opening hand card, but it's even better than that, because assuming you're playing a deck with mostly permanents, then it's selection. It's 3 mana for a 2/2 draw a card with selection. It's like a ponder, attached to a creature. So yeah, the card is absolutely insane, and there wasn't it's tough. I think this versus Hunter's Talent as green card of the year is a tough battle. So, but yeah, I'm glad you called it out here. For me, I'm going to go with, there's so many. This year was insane. It's hard to choose just one. I'm going with Mischievous Mystic as just my card of the year. I think that will be the card that I remember most from this year. It's just really, again, kind of solving the blue problems that I had. In terms of like my favorite card of the year, though, I do want to call out Cat Collector as a card that just kind of enables life gain in a way that we just haven't seen in Peasant for many years. It's been a long time since I think life gain as a strategy in Peasant made a whole lot of sense, and Cat Collector helps a lot towards really creating an archetype. And to me, that's what I like the most when I see new cards coming out, is thinking like, okay, does this actually help enable a new synergy or a new archetype that we haven't seen or haven't seen in a while? So I definitely like Cat Collector quite a lot, but Mystic is my card of the year.
Yeah, I think Cat Collector being self-enabling, first of all, is really important. And then secondly, I think the fact that it has synergy with like Bastion of Remembrance, Blood Artist effects. A lot of the other life gain cards that we've seen previously didn't really do that. They kind of like got bigger for gaining life or something like that. Whereas I think making just random generic bodies is obviously, making cardboard is really powerful, but it's partly because they funnel into the effects in the cube that you can actually use to gain life. So I think that all contributes to the card being very good. I kind of bounced back and forth on a few different cards. I mean, I'm looking through the list of cards we got this year, and it occurs to me there's a bunch of cards that I really, really love that we got this year that we didn't even talk about. Stuff like Getaway Glamour or Out Cold, or these like really powerful spells that, didn't even mention. That shows how ridiculous this year was, because if you heard me earlier in the year, I couldn't stop gushing about Getaway Glamour. I love that card.
Yeah, This Town Ain't Big Enough is another one that I was like, this doesn't fit any of the categories, but I really like it.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, if I'm picking like the best card of the year, I don't know. I kind of think it has to be Rutstein. I think the card has just been format warping even in our cube. I think it's one of those cards that it's so powerful that it's like a very good card in the mainline cube. You could say Mischievous Mystics in the same category, and it's probably, because it's a monocolored card, you're going to see it more often. But I don't know, man. Rutstein it felt like for a while there, it was just all Rutstein all the time. And the card comes down and you're just like, I don't know how to beat this. You could just play it on curve and it's still good because of the aura effect it gives that makes all your creatures cheaper. I will say though, this year, a certain 1/1 mouse soldier stole my heart, but This was just a fantastic year for Magic. There's so many cards that we got this year that were worthy of talking about. So even cards we didn't talk about that we really like. We could go on and on and on. So very, very great year. I was really excited about this one. I hope if this is a sign of what Magic's going to look like moving forward, I can handle some Universes Beyond nonsense if this is the sort of designs we're going to be getting.
Yeah, and of course Teld is referring to Bravekin Duo as the 1/1 mouse.
Of course.
Again, there's other cards that I wanted to talk about at some point, but we do have to wrap things up at some point. So why don't we just transition to a small section before we close out with a wish list for 2025? What are the things that we most want from next year, or things that we feel like are still lacking? I find it hard to point at our list and be like, we're missing this. I think for both of our cubes, we're generally in a good spot outside of like maybe one or two small categories. So my list is more about things I would like to see rather than things that are missing. But I guess I'll go ahead and kick off with a few things. I would like to see a good green-white token payoff. We kind of got one this year with actually can't remember the name of the card, but the green-white star with trample.
Mentor.
Yeah, something mentor. Has power and toughness equal to the number of creatures you control. That's a decent payoff, but I would like to see like one of those self-fulfilling engine type cards that creates tokens and also uses token. That's it, Burrowguard Mentor. We got close with Growing Ranks being knocked down to uncommon in Pioneer Masters, but that card's just way too slow for 2024, 2025 Magic. So a good green-white token payoff. Like, we know we're going to get green-white in every other set as tokens, so like give us a good payoff. I would love another cantrip. I'm going to say this every single year. Just give us another good cantrip. Like, consider. I know it's hard to do that, but it seemed like with Opt being in Foundations that we could see some better cantrips in surrounding sets. My personal favorite would be Thought Scour, just like a self-milling cantrip I would be very happy with. Dual land cycles, like we got hooked up with dual lands this year for Peasant Cube across Duskmourn and MH3. Like, you could have easily just completely revamped a dual land section of a Peasant Cube, which we did. I would like to see them continue to push very minor synergies on lands. Like, even the deserts from OTJ, I think, are a step in the right direction, because like they're not super powerful, but they do have like minor synergies with certain things. Colorless cards that matter, like there just aren't any. Like, the one that was mentioned here, like, clearly we all agreed wasn't very good at all. So, something better than Glimmerlight, please, for the love of God, so that like
we can't print something better than Glimmerlight without breaking.
It's literally impossible. Yeah, it's literally
that
impossible.
can't be the like benchmark for good colorless cards for a year. Like,
I
just
need like
can't
3
be it.
Glimmerlights. Like, just give us 3 more Glimmerlights, and I'm happy.
The last thing I want to see, and this is like half jokey but also half serious, I'm trying to like channel my Nostradamus powers. I would just lose my shit if the Tarkir revisit had Siege Rhino at uncommon, and I don't even believe that is super far-fetched, because Colossadactyl is an uncommon in a single color and Siege Rhino is 3 colors. So if you see Siege Rhino at uncommon, I just want you to know that you heard it here first.
I would love that, and also I think people will flip out. It's a great nostalgia bait, and like you can't print Siege Rhino at rare in 2024, right?
You can't. It's just a throwaway rare. It's just a throwaway rare. So yeah, that's more of a prediction than something I am actually like, oh, I want this for Peasant Cube. It's just something I wanted to throw out in the ether. So
just to be clear, we would play it at Peasant Cube because nostalgia bait, but you know.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of those. Definitely, I want more blue cantrips. It's even having as like a wish list item a dual land cycle. I don't think is necessary. We're just gonna get more cool dual lands. They clearly are trying to do that very intentionally now, of giving us interesting dual land cycles. So yeah, I'm excited to see what they do there, I guess is how I'd put it. I definitely agree on more colorless cards that matter. This was not a good year for colorless cards. A couple other things I have. So we're going to Aether Drift. I'm very excited to see what they do with vehicles, because vehicle is a card type that I basically don't use at all at the moment, or practically not at all. And I think for good reason. Most vehicles are either bad or uninteresting, or a combination of the two. So I'm hopeful that they will give us interesting, even if it's just a few like Mirrodin style vehicles that we've seen in other products. I'd be happy with that. But
I do, not to cut you off, but I do have a prediction about that as well with Aether Drift, that it would be the perfect place to bring junk tokens into like the standard fold. Junk tokens came out in Fallout, and they're like clues that impulse draw. Like you tap them. Yeah, you tap them, you exile the top card of your library, you can play it until end of turn, and it's like, these would be perfect in some set somewhere, but I don't know where they would use them. Aether Drift feels like the perfect place to just bring junk tokens into a standard set.
Oh, it's like when they're death racing and their card gets blown up or whatever. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's just left with junk. Oh yeah.
I'm just surprised that we didn't see it in Bloomburrow with the raccoons. It just seemed like a nice crossover there, and they didn't.
I didn't even think about that.
Oh, that would have helped with, actually that's brilliant, because that also would have helped with expending, right? Without actually being able to hit your 4 mana.
It makes me think that they might have playtested it and found that the junk tokens are just pretty strong and limited. So, but I don't know. I agree with you. That'd be interesting. One thing I specifically care about is more interesting gold cards in a couple of different pairings. So for me, my black-red section is fairly one note. It's basically just all about sacrifice. And yeah, there's artifact sacrifice versus creature sacrifice is kind of where I'm trying to differentiate, but I would like to see black-red do something else. They've been dipping into the kind of Punisher, opponent loses life or discards a card or sacks a permanent thing, but I think the majority of those cards have just been not very good. So I just like to see them do different things with black-red. I want to see more busted blue-green gold cards, because that's a thing they've clearly decided they're going to start doing going forward, is just, really pushing the blue-green gold card. So I'm interested to see what they do there.
Bookworm was a hell of a card.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Repulsive Mutation and Bookworm both coming this year was huge.
Red-green as well, kind of similar to black-red. My whole red-green section is just, creatures that smash, and I'd like to see maybe a little bit more variety there. And then lastly, just I'm very happy with what they've been doing with the cheap blue creature suite. I want to just see more. I want to see 1-drops that are actually playable and decent. I do still think that ultimately blue is probably the worst color in my cube, just because it still ultimately doesn't have cheap creatures that are quite as good as the other colors, even though they've gotten a lot of improvements this year. So I just want to see more of that.
I feel like blue's 2 or 3 best cheap creatures are absolutely incredible, and then after that it kind of starts falling off. For me, it's more specific stuff. So like, I would like some cards that continue tying the room together for the sort of black-white deck. I absolutely love drafting black-white in our cube, this sort of mid-range, like, it's like a aggro dork reanimator deck. I don't think the deck is very good. I think it got a huge amount of help this year with cards like Wishdrinker Vampire and these, like, the black-white 2 power matters on top of some other really, really sweet cards. Stuff like Guardian of the Great Door were nice pickups, The Thoughtseize Lizard was really good. I would like to see a couple more cards that continue tying this room together, that make the black and white cards that we're running pair well together. I would like to see another good on rate, like -X effect, where ideally something along the lines of Shrouded Shepherd that we could play maybe in a monocolor, or just, is powerful enough to clear the bar, just to deal with the sheer number of 1/1 tokens that we're starting to have at Peasant. Maybe a red sweeper might be nice. And then the last thing is a good blue utility land, because we kind of deemed that the blue MDFCs that we got are just all kind of bad. And so it's the only color that we don't have one of those MDFC lands, at least one in the section. So I wouldn't mind a blue utility land.
I think Sync is pretty good. felt the same as y'all, that going in, I was like, unsubstantiate for an extra blue mana, that can't possibly be worth playing. But yeah, we found it to be to deserve its spot, I would say.
That's not my experience with it. My experience with it being is blue also hurts the most from having the tap land or having to bolt itself to get it to come in untapped. So I'm not a huge fan of it. I'm personally not a huge fan of the black one, the 4-mana kill spell. But like, I don't consider it just free to put that card like in a deck, because when you actually cast it, it's using your whole turn. So like, you didn't really get away with that much. But like, it's hard to argue against having just a clean kill spell in a land slot. But I also don't think that one's particularly interesting or that good. But that's just my personal feelings about the 1-for-1 interactive expensive MDFCs. But yeah, blue, it doesn't even have to be an MDFC necessarily. I hear you on blue utility land. Something, I don't know, something that makes a clue or something would be nice. But I don't know if we've got just a couple more minutes here. Is there anything else like 2024-ish that you guys want to get off your chest before we move into the new year? Any final cards that didn't make the list anywhere that deserve a shout before we close this out?
No, I mean, I just reiterate, I think it was a banner year. I'm very excited for 2025 based on what happened in 2024. The one caveat being, we will have 3 Universes Beyond sets coming to Arena. That will be, a huge portion of the new cards added to the pool will be Spider-Man and, Final Fantasy and whatever the third UV set is. Yeah, exactly. And, that I guess would be my other wishlist item, is that they just don't mess that up. I really hope that we get cards that are interesting to play with and don't feel really bizarre and weird to add to the average cubes. I understand there's plenty of people out there who are not planning on playing with the UV cards, and I definitely am. I'm going to play with them. But I hope that they're not too jarring, that they at least make reasonable amounts of sense alongside the Lord of the Rings cards and Aether Drift and everything else that we have. So
yeah, I think I like, given the choice, I would have rather they not exist, that this not be a thing. But now that it is happening, whether we like it or not, I guess you kind of have to hope that it succeeds, because it failing would probably end up being just a mess for the next couple of years. Whereas if it succeeds, like, it's at least, like, if it's done really well, at least we keep getting sweet cube cards, right?
Yeah, but if it exceeds it, we get more of it. Yeah, so it's kind of
there is that. Yeah, I did want to shout out Eldrazi Repurposer. We didn't really have it for any of the categories, but that card was a big anchor card for this year. I think it's amazing in both cubes as just it's a card you can play off your elf from turn 1. You can play it on turn 2, and it helps you accelerate further into the game. The making an extra body sometimes gains you like 5 life, and just a really, really powerful, solid card that doesn't do anything like crazy impressive, but just kind of always does the job you want it to do. It's just a very, very rock solid card. Really, really good anchor card.
Usually when a common is like a decent role player in our mainline cube, like it's usually Peasant all-star status.
Yeah, somehow manages, it feels like, to kind of be just good anchor card in both, as opposed to that. Because yeah, most of the other cards that we run that are common or even uncommon in the mainline cube are all-stars here. Yeah, so I mean, it was just a very, very good year for Magic. The end of the year kind of sucked. Like, Foundations and Pioneer Masters, I think both are hard misses for me, both in terms of like what we got as well as the retail limited format. Like, I thought I couldn't dislike Foundations more, but I played one draft of Pioneer Masters and got boggled like 3 times and was like, nope, I'm good. That's enough. That's enough for one lifetime for me.
I like Pioneer Masters, but that. Without getting into too much details, it's just indicative of an era of Magic where I was like actually a good player and liked a lot of the stuff that was coming out. So yeah, fantastic year. 2024 was awesome. It will remain to be seen how much of that is off of the back of MH3 and how much MH3 shifts around next year, like if everything is just fielded out because of the cards we got this year. But I'm hoping that's not the case, especially if the Universes Beyond sets adapt the mentality of like having to be more powerful to try and pull people in and get people to play these sorts of things. So we'll see how that all pans out, and that's
yeah, if they're no longer, we talked about this before the episode, but if they're no longer doing direct to modern sets, then the only way they can force rotation in modern is to print cards that are completely busted for standard. So that's my expectation, is just a series of completely ridiculous cards, and we'll get to pick and choose which ones we want to play.
I'm hoping I would actually be pretty happy if there's a playable card in my cube called Phoenix Down. That would be kind of cool. Give me like a colorless reanimation or something.
I was gonna say white, but yeah, maybe colorless for an item. Yeah, reanimation target or
I have another request or another hope for 2025 that we don't get two different Spider-Mans at Uncommon that we have to play.
Oh, I can tell you now.
I really like it if. Well, at Uncommon specifically, there's going to be a bunch of rare Spider-Mans. There's going to be like 7 rare Spider-Mans. Sure. But at Uncommon, please, just one. Just give me one Uncommon Spider-Man.
So that when you say Spider-Man, people know what you're talking about?
If I have to play with like 5 different Spider-Mans, that will be a little bit upsetting. But yeah, if there's one that's good enough, that's fine.
How many Gandalfs did we get at Uncommon? Was it just the one?
Okay, we got 5 Gandalfs, but only one of them was Uncommon. So
all right, then we're fine.
I think there are multiple Golems at Uncommon. Maybe not. Maybe all the other ones are rares. Anyway, we're gonna get a bunch of Spider-Mans, but what if one of them is like Miles Morales as Uncommon? Is that fine?
Well, there's gonna be like a black-red Uncommon Spider-Man. There's gonna be a green-black Uncommon Spider-Man. It's just like, and they're all gonna be insane because they're gonna be Spider-Man. So.
Spider-Man 2099.
yeah.
You're gonna have all the Spider-Mans. Yeah, I have no predictions about Spider-Man right now. I'll just wait until that happens. That's how I feel about that set. Yeah, okay, let's go ahead and tie this bad boy up. Remember, you can find us on Twitter at JankDiverGaming, youtube.com/JankDiverGaming, and you can find Teld streaming on twitch.tv/Teld Talks, TELD Talks, and you can find Danielius in the Jank Diver Gaming server, but also moderating Alex's Court of Cause limited level ups server. That's going to go ahead and do it for 2024. This is the final episode of the year. We'll be back with some non-review content, hopefully, at the beginning of the new year, and really looking forward to just seeing what 2025 brings to Cube. Across all rarities and across all levels. So thanks for hanging out, Danielius. As always, thanks for joining us, and we'll have you back almost certainly for Ether Drift review, if not something else before then as well. And to all the listeners, have a wonderful new year, happy holidays, Merry Christmas, all that good stuff, and we will see you next time.
Yep, have a Merry Christmas, everybody.
All right, very, very small farewell here. Best and worst limited sets of the year.
Best Dustmorn easily for best. Not very close to me. I mean, OTJ was good for sure, but Dustmorn is close to an all-timer for me. And I honestly don't think any of the rest were very good. MKM, not great. MH3 was a disaster. Bloomborough was just too simple, and Foundations is like barely even a set. So yeah, I'd say Dustmorn by a huge amount. And then worst, probably Foundations. I mean, Foundations or MH3. MH3 I think was kind of a disaster of a limited environment. Like Writhing Chrysalis was an insane choice. So
yeah, we have a lot of people on our server who think that set was really good. I don't.
I like it. I like it a lot.
I think I definitely enjoyed it more than Foundations, as we call it. You know,
I did too.
That format was just awful. I think it's pretty close for me between Duskmourn and OTJ. If I'm looking at it strictly objectively, I think Duskmourn is probably the better set. But man, OTJ made me feel things.
Oh, I loved OTJ. I played OTJ probably even more than Duskmorn, but there was like the part of OTJ where a lot of the set felt like you just had to find a really good rare and then a bunch of ways to recur it. That kind of got old after a little bit. I do think there's just like a little bit more you could do in Duskmorn, but yeah, I mean they're both good sets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Duskmorn's my pick for the best. Although OTJ is a close second, I love losing the Bonnie Paul. It's just a very enjoyable experience.
Yeah. I did a talk. I talked about it in Discord, and I can't remember if I posted about it, but just statistically, I'm pretty sure Duskmorn was more rare driven than OTJ was, just based off the stats. I
could buy it.
Valmot's Onslaught was a format ruining card.
That's a good point.
I do really think Duskmorn was great, but I do think there's something to be said that the OTJ broken rares were mostly like multicolor rares that you had to really work for. That being said, I think aggro being viable in Duskmorn is also a big advantage in its favor. Like that is one of the weaknesses of OTJ is that if you're not playing like mid-range soup stuff, there's not really a way to get under people. You just have to you can play green-white if it's open and kind of be aggressive, but pretty much everything starts at like mid-range of various flavors in OTJ.
Well, red just doesn't really work as a color in OTJ, which is it was just a bit of a miss. And I feel like all the colors basically work in Duskmorn. Like some of the archetypes aren't as good as others, but red was just so awful in OTJ. It's like kind of hard Yeah, that was a rough look. In general, I judge formats poorly, or just one of the colors just doesn't really do anything. I don't really understand how that happens. In like, again, from a design perspective, but.
Yeah, you're talking to somebody who loves Midnight Hunt and Zendikar Rising, so like those are and those are sets where there are colors that just don't work in those formats too.
Well, Midnight Hunt only had 2 colors.
Yeah, exactly, blue and black.
Yeah, Duskmourn, easy. Well, not easy win. I did like OTJ, and I like MH3 a lot more than most people. That's because I drafted every deck as if I was going to try and beat multiple Writhing Chrysalises, so just like in endless sundering eruptions and stuff like that. I actually started main deck and Consigned to Memories.
Gross.
And things like that.
I probably liked MKM more than most people, but again, like I was also somehow managed to go like 65% win rate in that format with drafting nothing but green piles the entire time. So I had a pretty good experience with that format. I'll admit the gameplay was a little dry, but like I do think it's better than any of the sets we've gotten in the back half of the year outside of like Foundations and Pioneer Masters. I think it's firmly an average set for me. It's like a 6 out of 10 maybe. Like I enjoyed it. 5 out of 10. I average somewhere in there.
Yeah, I didn't hate MKM, but there's no way it's like a best of the year type thing or anything like that.
No.
I refuse to give any shine to a set that they made as like a Hasbro like product crossover. I just can't.
The clue cards. I forgot to mention the stupid Afterlife insurance. Oh well. Worst set of the year. Foundations is not only my least favorite limited set of the year, my literal least favorite limited set of all time. I fucking hate Foundations. I think it sucks. I think new people who are coming into the game have been given a huge disservice by playing that set. Oh my god, I think it's awful. And part of the premise being like the whole standard backbone thing, none of these cards are going to see play. They're just going to make better versions.
What a garbage fire of a set. Like easily
I do not like it.
In an otherwise amazing year where even the bad sets were pretty good, like holy moly, is that a stinker.
Well, it's funny because it's like they have fire design, and it's like from the start of fire design to now, this is the golden age of limited, where just every set is so much better than almost every set is so much better than almost every set that ever came before it, practically. And then right at the end, they're just like, what if we just threw in this awful set that reminds you of Core 2012 or whatever? It's just like I don't.
Yeah, what if we put no card draw in the set? Right, what if we didn't put any mana fixing in the set? What if we made green unplayable?
Yeah, no sense.
But green's unplayable, but also green has overrun, so you might just die to it.
Yeah, it's like let's make a looter the best card in the entire format, because otherwise you can't. Otherwise, there's no way to get
Foundations is the only time playing on Arena that I've ever like dropped after a loss. Like I'll go like 0-1 and be like, I don't want to play this deck. I'm dropping.
I played every single format since Rise of the Eldrazi. Or Zendikar, which came before Rise of the Eldrazi. I played every set since then, and I've drafted every set probably at least 20 times to up to like 200 times. Foundations, I watched somebody do a draft, and I was like, yep, not playing that. I've watched a little bit since then, but yeah, that's it. I don't need to play that. No.
Not for me, but also I question if we can't just have like semi-complex sets for new players too. It is probably useful for actual literal first-time Magic players. I will give them that. And sure, if it affects standard, that's great. But from the even remotely in franchise perspective, I think this is just a garbage limited format.
Yeah, agreed.
Hello, and congratulations on making it through another year with Jank Diver Gaming. As we move into 2025, I wanted to remind everyone that we'll be putting a community-wide ban on certain words and phrases related to Magic the Gathering in the new year. Starting off in 2025, we will no longer be saying skill issue when someone complains about a Magic card. Even in cases where there's clearly a skill issue at hand, we will refrain from using this terminology. Quote-unquote, cracked is no longer an acceptable way to refer to a broken Magic card. That's so 2023. Instead, we will be introducing alternatives to cracked, like Crudy, Crunk, and the long-awaited return of tight. We're also leaving the phrase cooking behind us. I'm sorry, but your Boros aggro deck isn't cooking. We will, however, allow the phrase cooking to continue to be used if players agree to also use the phrase order and takeout when they craft an extremely boring deck. Under no circumstances will we continue to tolerate the phrase, "This is a deck of all time," or any of its variations. It wasn't clever in 2023, it's not clever now. In addition to all of the above, you will no longer be allowed to win a cube game if you complain the entire time leading up to your victory. These wins will be registered as losses and you will be perma-muted during your next round. How did this wheel is considered threat level 5 speech at this point, and why is this still in the pack isn't allowed until at least after pack 1 pick 4. If you're playing a paper draft and you at any point announce, "Wow, this just paid for my draft," you are contractually obligated to sell whatever card you picked after your draft. We will not be using leet speak in the new year. Lol and lamau are not words, and you're a perfectly capable speaker, so please act like one. Finally, there will be no discussion of lucky top decks in 2025. It's Cube, every top deck is great. Thank you for listening to this important PSA, and may we have a more intellectually stimulating 2025.